In that instant, Klein even believed that he had transmigrated back. However, the elegant gas lamp surrounded by brass grids and the silver inlaid tin, which old Neil kept his hand-ground coffee in, made him recognize the reality he was in. The transmigrator, Emperor Russell, is really a fellow countryman of mine? He was using simplified Chinese, which doesn't exist in this world, to record secrets. With the indescribable feeling of identifying an old friend in a different world, Klein quickly read through the 3 pages. The 18th of November. Truly a fascinating matter. A blue sky experimentation and a chance mistake made me discover the pathetic fellow lost and trapped in the deep darkness amid the storms. He can only approach the reality of this world on the day of the full moon every month. Yet, he is unable to transmit his cries. He is lucky to have met me, the protagonist of this era. After reading the paragraph I wrote above, I suddenly felt a little down. Even my Chinese is written like a translation. 4 decades have passed in a finger snap. My past memories feel more like a dream. 1184, the 1st of January. At the Grand New Year Gala, Lady Florina was truly splendid. The 2nd of January. My diplomats are all idiots. The 3rd of January. I made a hasty choice back then. In hindsight, I should have chosen the apprentice, the seer, or the bandit. Unfortunately, there is no way of redoing it. The 4th of January. Why are my children so stupid? I've repeated myself so many times. Do not be fooled by those charlatans. The key thing about potions is not about grasping them, but digesting them. It's nothing about tapping powers, but acting. And the name of a potion is not solely symbolic at its core, but a concrete imagery, and the key to digestion. The 9th of September. An alliance opposing me has been established. Fasak from the north, Loan from the east, Fainapotter from the south. My enemies have finally joined forces, but I have no fear. I will use facts to teach them that the generations of weapons and knowledge cannot be compensated by mere numbers and low-grade sequencers. Besides, it's not as though I do not have subordinates. As for the higher grades, have they forgotten who I am? The 23rd of September. I have lost communications with the ship seeking the forsaken land of the gods. I should consider inventing wireless telegraphs. I hope it would not be affected by the storm. The 24th of September. Miss Ithaca is more mesmerizing than Lady Florina. Perhaps, I'm just being nostalgic about my youth. Due to the complexity of characters in simplified Chinese, the font was slightly larger than normal, leading to less content on each page. Furthermore, for preservational and research purposes, the back of each page was left empty. But even so, Klein still felt an upheaval of emotions when he read the diary. In particular, Emperor Russell's description of the crux of potions made him feel like he found the path to the solution. He was thrilled at having learned a priceless secret. Perhaps this will be a beacon for my future path as a Beander. Well, the 3 pages belong to entries at different times. It seems Emperor Russell only writes the year on the first entry of each year. It cannot be determined which year the 2 pages with September and November belong to. Who is the pathetic fellow he discovered? What do digesting and acting actually mean? Where is the forsaken land of the gods? These questions bubbled in Klein's head. It made him eager to immediately gather all of Emperor Russell's diary and read it from cover to cover. Klein? At that moment, old Neil asked puzzledly across him. Klein jolted awake as he hurriedly covered it up with a laugh. I thought I would be the most special one. I was trying to decipher and interpret it. You are young indeed. Old Neil nodded, laughing. I once believed that I was the most special one as well. Klein flipped through the 3 pages in his hand and after confirming that he had not missed anything, he handed it over to old Neil and thoughtlessly asked, Do we only have these few pages? I want to see more of Emperor Russell's diary. Did you think there would be many? Old Neil caressed the scripts as his wrinkles deepened from his scoff. There are not many incidents a year that involve Beyonders and mystery to begin with. Sigh, the major reason is the gradual extinction of extraordinary species in our northern continent. Without them, there won't be a lot of potions, causing the number of Beyonders to reduce with time. Sigh, over the past few centuries, dragons, giants, and elves have become simply records in books. Even the sea folks are no longer seen near the coastal waters. Upon hearing this, Klein suddenly thought of a meme. He immediately said with a smile, I think it's time to establish a Dragons and Giants Protection Association. Old Neil looked confused when he heard that. It took him quite some time to figure out what it meant. After figuring out its meaning, he rapped the table and laughed quite heartily in a not-so-gentlemanly manner. Ha ha, Klein, you really are humorous. This is a tradition of our Lowen Kingdom. It's good that young people have a sense of humor. I believe we shouldn't be overly narrow in scope. Why are we only protecting dragons and giants? It should be called Fantastic Beasts Protection Association. No, no, no. How can we forget those poor plants? Klein shook his head. They exchanged looks and proclaimed in unison, Fantastic Organisms Protection Association. Both of them laughed tacitly. The awkwardness and unfamiliarity of the atmosphere between them dissipated considerably. There are fewer interesting young people like you these days. Where was I? Old Neil's wrinkles suffused a smile as he said, I remember. There are not many incidents a year that involve Beyonders and mystery to begin with. The retards who revere Emperor Roussel are the minority of the minority. It's already pretty good that we can obtain 3 scripts. Well, the other larger cathedrals or dioceses might have some. After muttering a few words, he took the approval note which Klein had placed on the table earlier and took a look. Are they pistol bullets, rifle bullets, or steam-pressured bullets? It's a revolver, answered Klein honestly. All right, I'll go get them. Ahem, do you have an armpit holster? As a gentleman, we can't let you have something bulging below your waist in public. Old Neil made a joke that all men understood. Hey, no. Do I need to get Captain to include it? Klein smiled cooperatively. Old Neil stood up and said, there's no need. I just need to make a record. It's an accessory item. Repeat after me. Accessory item. Were you a teacher in the past? Joked Klein. I spent some time at the church's Sunday school and free schools. Old Neil waved the note and took out a key from the drawer. He then opened the iron door that led into an inner chamber. Beyonders do not seem much different from commoners. Klein murmured silently before casting his gaze on the table where the 3 pages of the diary were. Emperor Roussel is indeed involved in the realm of mystery. His diary is invaluable. To others, they are just pieces of scrap paper. It is unknown when they will be deciphered, but they are a valuable treasure to me. I wonder where the remaining parts of the diary are. I have to think of ways to get more. Klein's mind went through upheavals as he could hardly calm down. This continued until Old Neil came out and closed the iron door. 10 demon hunting bullets, 30 revolver bullets, an ox-hide armpit holster, and a 7th Unit, Special Operations Department badge. Please count them and give them a try. Remember to sign the logbook. Old Neil placed the items down on the table. The revolver bullets were arranged neatly in a paper box which was divided into 3 layers. The bullets shimmered with a yellow sheen just like the bullets back home, but they appeared narrower. As for the demon hunting bullets, they were kept in a small iron box. The shape was identical to regular revolver bullets, but their surface was silver in color. Upon a more careful examination, there were complicated and dazzling patterns with tiny sacred emblems, a black background dotted with stars and a half-crimson moon, engraved at the bottom. The ox-hide holster felt solid and it came with a belt and buckle. Beside it was a badge half the size of a palm. It had a metallic background with, Owa County Police Department and 7th Unit, Special Operations Department, inscribed in silver text. They formed almost 2 sealed circles and surrounded the 2 crossed swords and a crown, police emblem. Unfortunately, it's not a Nighthawk's badge, Klein said half wistfully and half probingly. Old Neil smiled and urged Klein to test the armpit holster. After he took off his jacket, Klein took quite a bit of effort to buckle up the holster, which hung close to his left armpit. Not bad. He put on his jacket again. Old Neil sized him up and nodded in satisfaction. It suits you well. My judgment is as accurate as usual. After putting away the other items into his pockets and signing the logbook, Klein had a short, casual conversation with Old Neil before leaving. Halfway, he slapped himself in the forehead. I forgot to learn more about the sequences and potions. It's all the fault of Emperor Roussel's diary. At this point, he was still unaware of what the first sequence of the complete pathway the Church of the Evernight Goddess possessed. All he knew was that it started with sequence 9. Roseanne had apparently mentioned something. The sleepless? Just as Klein was slowly walking towards the stairs, a person came down. He wore tight trousers which made movement easy. His white shirt was not tucked in, and he had a clear romantic temperament of a poet. He was none other than the black-haired, green-eyed police inspector who had previously came to search Klein's place. They had met upstairs previously, but they had not exchanged words. Good afternoon, greeted the young poet like Nighthawk with a smile. Good afternoon. I believe I do not need to introduce myself, answered Klein humorously. There's no need. I have a deep impression of you. The young Nighthawk extended his right hand and said, Leonard Mitchell. Sequence 8's a midnight poet. Sequence 8. He's really a poet. Klein smilingly shook his hand as he returned with a question. You have a deep impression of me? Leonard Mitchell's green eyes were deep as he replied with a very faint smile. You have a special disposition. He feels and sounds so gay. The corners of Klein's mouth moved slightly as he barely said with a smile, I don't think so myself. After encountering an accident like that, you remained alive despite not receiving our protection immediately. That makes you special enough. Leonard pointed ahead. I have to replace Captain. See you tomorrow. See you tomorrow. Klein turned to make way for the Nighthawk. As he walked to the ends of the stairwell, Leonard Mitchell suddenly turned around and stared at the stone-paved ground which was illuminated by the yellow sunset. He muttered into the air softly, Did you manage to notice anything? Indeed, there's nothing special about him. After he went up the stairs and returned to the reception hall, Klein was about to bid Roseanne farewell when he heard the brown-haired girl mention briskly, Captain says that you can come on Monday. He wants you to settle your household affairs first. All right. Klein never expected the Nighthawk's management to be so humane and accommodating. It made him feel a little grateful. He was planning on waking early the next morning and make use of the opportunity to wander around to visit Tingen University. He planned on informing the staff in charge of the interview that he was not participating in the follow-up interviews. After all, he had originally obtained the opportunity to make the interview because of his professor's recommendation letter. Regardless, it was basic courtesy to have formal closure. Even if it was not for himself, he had to respect his mentor's efforts. And in a world without telephones, where telegrams were charged by the character, and the fact that it would be too late to send a letter, he felt that taking the public carriage to the university was the most economical and suitable solution. Having received the captain's special approval, Klein did not need to tire himself out. He could wake up late and still make his way there on time. Klein was just about to take off his hat to bid Roseanne farewell when he suddenly thought of something. He looked around and suppressed his voice. Roseanne, do you know what the starting point of the church's complete sequence is? He had forgotten to ask old Neil. Roseanne's eyes widened as she looked at Klein in astonishment. You wish to become a Beyander? Was I that obvious? Klein's body language betrayed him as he answered in embarrassment. Having learned that extraordinary and mysterious powers exist in the world, it's inevitable that I have some yearnings for it. Oh my goddess. Do you know how dangerous it is? Didn't Captain tell you? The enemies of Beyonders are not just cultists or dark warlocks, but themselves. People lose control nearly every year. Some even end up sacrificing themselves. Aren't you going to consider how your family will feel? Roseanne's hand gestures amplified her tone as her reaction appeared overly agitated. Klein, I think the better choice is to be a civilian staff. There's nearly no danger, and our salary increases every year. After a few years of work, you will have saved up much money, allowing you to rent a bungalow in the North Borough or in the suburbs. You can then marry a rich and charming lady and have a wonderful family, having adorable and naughty little angels. Roseanne, stop. Hold up. Klein hurriedly stopped her in exasperation when he realized that she was changing the subject. I just want to, understand the basics for now. All right. Roseanne fell silent for a few seconds as she lowered her gaze, feeling somewhat sorry. Due to what happened to my father, whenever I face similar problems, I tend to be, a little agitated. However, to be honest, I'm filled with respect towards any man or woman who willingly wishes to be a Nighthawk. I understand, echoed Klein. Roseanne blinked her light brown eyes and added, my father once said that one should never think that they can resolve hidden risks or combat danger by simply becoming more powerful or a higher sequencer. In fact, it's the opposite. They will encounter more terrifying matters. When facing the unknown or a terrifying existence, death and insanity are the only two outcomes. Hey, he ended up sacrificing himself 2 weeks after saying that. Klein, don't look at me with pity. My life is great now, really great. It's only right to feel fear towards these matters. I only want to know the basics. Klein repeated his previous reply, not sure whether he should laugh or cry. Captain explained it more clearly than you. And even if I do not become a Beyander, I have already encountered something extraordinary. All right, said Roseanne ruminatively. I've heard Captain's and old Neil's conversation before. As extraordinary creatures are declining or going extinct, few high sequencers exist in this era. It's already very impressive to become a Beyander. Combining our Tingen city and the suburbs, there are hundreds of thousands of people or maybe even more. Yet, there are only about 30 plus Beyonders. Well, it's just my guess. I'm not counting the cultists and dark warlocks who hide in the dark. Without waiting for Klein's reply, she seemed to regain her vibrancy as she clenched her fist and brought it to her chest. And among these 30-plus Beyonders, most of them are at Sequence 9. It seems I have gone off topic. It's okay. That was something I wanted to know as well. Klein wished that Roseanne could be like her usual self, revealing more information as she rambled on. Anyways, it's already very, very impressive to become a Beyonder. Roseanne repeated herself. The starting sequence of our church's complete sequence is Sleepless. Sequence 9, Sleepless. Indeed, Klein nodded as he watched Roseanne finding hard to stop herself from describing in detail. You should be able to guess from the name. A sleepless is someone who does not need to sleep at night. 3 to 4 hours of rest in the day would be sufficient. Man, I'm so envious. No, not at all. Sleep is a gift bestowed upon us by the goddess. It's the truest bliss. Where was I? Right. A sleepless can see through the darkness even without any lights. The deeper into the night, the more powerful they become. I mean more powerful in the aspects of their physical strength, their intuition, and their mental capabilities. However, although they can detect unknown dangers that lurk in the dark, they will still rely on demon-hunting bullets and other items to handle monsters they are unable to deal with via normal means. My father was once a sleepless. Without waiting for Klein to press on, Roseanne continued, after that, it's Sequence 8's A Midnight Poet, and one level higher is Sequence 7's Nightmare. Nightmare? Klein instantly recalled that Dunn Smith had guided his dreams. He asked as a confirmation, Captain? You know about it? Roseanne's mouth nearly turned into an O shape. Captain once entered my dream. Klein glanced around as he lowered his voice once more. Got it. Roseanne was enlightened as she answered with a whisper. She picked up a coffee cup beside her and took a sip before saying wistfully, there are only 2 Sequence 7 Beyonders in our Tingen City's church. It's likely that Captain is one of them. Even if he goes to a large diocese like Backland, he is still an impressive figure. Some deacons might not even be stronger than he is. So Captain is that impressive? Klein echoed with a smile. Frankly, Dunn-Smith's appearance last night had left a deep impression on him. He had basically believed that Dunn was an extremely powerful Beyonder. Of course. Roseanne proudly straightened her back. In moments, the scatterbrained her said with a vexed expression, as for what's above Sequence 7, I have no idea. Among all the Nighthawks, perhaps only Captain will know. Then what about other starting sequences? The ones that aren't complete? Klein was satisfied as he changed the subject. It had to be said that Roseanne's description of Sleepless did match his imaginations and expectations of Beyonders. However, it was not the kind he wished to become. The perfect Sequence 9 was likely one that could study and grasp more knowledge of the mystery. By doing so, he could leverage on them to figure out the reason for his transmigration and lay the foundations of his future transmigration back. Roseanne thought for a moment before saying with a sigh, I'm not that interested in this aspect. I only know we have more than other churches. After all, the goddess is the mother of the secrets. Well, there should be 2 or 3. Some of our teammates are cold and distant, making me fear them. They also have a strange smell to them. Some members. Well, I mean you should talk to old Neil. He knows a lot, as well as quite a number of interesting magical rituals. Let me think. He once mentioned his Sequence 9 title, which is also the name of the potion formula. Yes, it's called Mystery Prior. Quite a number of interesting magical rituals? Mystery Prior sounds very close to what I want. Klein was slightly delighted. In addition, I also know of the name of a Sequence 7, the kind that's incomplete. Roseanne said with a flaunting tone. She had just thought of it while recollecting. What is it? Klein was abnormally curious. In a world where high sequencers were scarce to the point of them possibly not existing, Sequence 7 was probably considered quite a potent force in the church. Roseanne revealed a sweet smile as she replied smugly, Spirit Medium. MDM. Daily? Asked Klein subconsciously. After his initial surprise, he realized that it was nothing unexpected. Only a Sequence 7 Beyonder could achieve such an impressive performance as a medium. Roseanne's eyes widened once again as she said in disbelief, how do you know of that too? I've met MDM. Daily. Klein did not hide the matter. All right, said Roseanne with an envious tone. If I can become a spirit medium, one just like MDM. Daily, then I'll be willing to be a Beyonder. No, I'll consider it carefully for 10 minutes. Yes, MDM. Daily fulfills all my imaginations as a Beyonder, echoed Klein in a slightly exaggerated manner. Having fulfilled his goals, he chatted idly with Roseanne for a few minutes until he realized he was not getting any new information. He took off his hat and bowed before leaving. As he walked down the stairs, Klein suddenly stopped after taking a few steps. He reached out to pad the notes in his inner pocket. Immediately following that, he took out 12 gold-pound notes and clenched them tightly in his left palm. Then, he reached his hand into his pocket and refused to release or pull them out again. Without realizing it, a smile appeared on his face. According to the customs of the Foodaholic Empire, China, a treat had to be given after earning money. It's time to give Melissa a treat tonight. The sky outside was gradually dyed golden as Klein looked into Melissa's eyes. He was momentarily at a loss for words. None of the lines he prepared could be used. He coughed lightly twice as he quickly racked his brains. Melissa, this isn't a waste of salary. In the future, my colleagues, as well as Benson's colleagues might visit. Are we going to host them in such a place? When Benson and I get married and have wives, are we still going to sleep in bunk beds? None of you have fiancés yet, right? We can wait a little while and save up more money in the meantime, answered Melissa in a logically concise manner. No, Melissa. This is a societal rule. Klein was stumped and could only count on lofty principles. Since I'm earning £3 a week, I should look like I'm earning £3 a week. To be honest, having rented an apartment before with others, Joe Mingray was no stranger to his present living conditions as Klein. He was very used to it, but it was because of his past experience that he knew how inconvenient such an environment was for a girl. Furthermore, his goal was to become a Beyander and study mysticism to find his way home. In the future, he was bound to conduct some magical rituals at home. Having too many people in the apartment building made incidents prone to happen. Klein saw that Melissa was about to continue arguing, and hurriedly added, "Don't worry. I'm not planning to get a bungalow, but probably a terrace. Basically, it has to have a bathroom we can call ours. Also, I like Mrs. Smurren's bread, Tingen biscuits, and lemon cakes too. We can first consider places near Iron Cross Street and Daffodil Street." Melissa pouted her lips slightly and fell silent for a moment before nodding slowly. "Besides, I'm in no rush to move either. We have to wait for Benson to return," said Klein with a chuckle. "We can't have him be shocked when he opens the door to find nothing, right? Imagine him saying in astonishment, 'Where are my things? Where are my siblings? Where's my home? Is this my home? Did I make a mistake? Goddess, wake me up if this is a dream. Why is my home gone after a few days of absence?'" His mimicking of Benson's tone made Melissa involuntarily smile as her eyes scrunched up and revealed her shallow dimples. No, Mr. Frankie would definitely be waiting by the door to get Benson to hand over the apartment keys. Benson wouldn't even be able to come up. The girl disparaged the miserly landlord. In the Moretti household, all of them would like to make Mr. Frankie the butt of their jokes for every trivial and major matter. It was all thanks to Benson who initiated this practice. Right, there's no way he would switch locks for the tenants after us, Klein echoed with a smile. He pointed at the door and quipped, "Miss Melissa, shall we head to Silver Crown Restaurant for a celebration?" Melissa sighed gently and said, "Klein, do you know Selina? My classmate and my good friend? Selina?" An image of a girl with wine-red hair and deep brown eyes surfaced in Klein's mind. Her parents were Evernight goddess believers. They had named her after Saint Selina as a blessing. She was not yet 16, and was half a year younger than Melissa. She was a happy, cheerful, and outgoing lady. Yes. Klein nodded in affirmation. Her elder brother, Chris, is a lawyer. He currently earns close to £3 a week as well. His fiancée works part-time as a typist, described Melissa. They have been engaged for more than 4 years. To ensure a decent and stable life after marriage, they are still saving money to this very day. They have yet to go down the wedding aisle and plan to wait for at least another year. According to Selina, there are many people like her brother. They typically get married after 28. You have to make advanced preparations and save up. Don't squander your money. It's just a meal at a restaurant. Is there a need to preach at me? Klein was rendered at a loss whether to laugh or cry. After a few seconds of thought, he said, "Melissa, I'm already earning £3 a week, and I'll have increments every year. There's no need for you to worry. But we need to save some money in the case of any unexpected emergencies. For example, what if that security company suddenly closes down? I have a classmate whose father's company went bankrupt. He had to find temporary work at the pier and their living conditions turned terrible instantly. She had no choice but to quit school," advised Melissa with a serious expression. Klein extended his hand to cover his face. That security company and the government. Yes, has some connections with the government. It will not easily close down. But even the government isn't stable. After every election, if the party in power changes, many people will have their positions stripped off. It turns into a mess. Melissa retorted in an unyielding manner. Sis, you sure know a lot. Klein found the humor in his exasperation as he shook his head. All right then I'll boil some soup with the leftovers from yesterday. Buy some pan-fried fish, a slab of black pepper beef, a small bottle of butter, and a cup of malt beer for me. Anyway, there should still be some celebration. They were commonly sold items by hawkers on Iron Cross Street. A piece of pan-fried fish was 6 to 8 pence. A not-so-big piece of black-peppered beef was 5 pence. A cup of malt beer was a penny. And a bottle of butter weighing about a quarter pound was 4 pence. But buying a pound of butter would only cost one solely 3 pence. The original Klein was responsible for buying ingredients during holidays, so he was no stranger to the prices. Klein did a mental estimate that Melissa would need about one solely 6 pence. Therefore, he took out 2 one solely notes. All right, Melissa did not object to Klein's proposal. She put down her backpack of stationery and took the notes. When he saw his sister taking out a tiny bottle for the butter and pots for the other food before briskly walking to the door, Klein thought for a moment and shouted out to her. Melissa, use the remaining money to buy some fruits. There were many hawkers on Iron Cross Street who would buy low-quality or expiring fruits from other places. The residents were not outraged about this because the prices were extremely cheap. They could taste the magnificent flavors after removing the rotten parts, so it was a cheap enjoyment. With that said, Klein took a few brisk steps forward and took out the remaining copper pennies from his pocket and stuffed it into his sister's palm. Ah? Melissa's brown eyes looked at her brother in puzzlement. Klein took 2 steps back and smiled. Remember to go to Mrs. Smurns. Reward yourself with a tiny lemon cake. Quote. Melissa's mouth widened as she blinked. Finally, she said a single word, okay. She quickly turned around, opened the door, and ran toward the stairwell. A river tore through the land, with cedar and maple trees lining the banks. The air so fresh, it was intoxicating. Klein, who was here to put closure to his interview, had his revolver with him. He held his cane and paid 6 pence for the public carriage. He walked down a cemented path and approached a 3-story stone building which was shaded by greenery. It was Tingen University's administrative block. It's truly worthy of being one of the 2 major universities of the Lowen Kingdom. With this being his first time here, Klein sighed as he walked. Compared to Tingen University, Koi University right across the river could only be described as shabby. Heave ho! Heave ho! Voices approached slowly as 2 rowing boats made their way upstream across the Koi River. Oars were being rowed in an orderly and rhythmic manner. This was a rowing sport that was popular among all the universities in Lowen Kingdom. With Klein requiring a scholarship to finance his university studies, he, Welch, and the others had joined Koi University's rowing club and were pretty good at it. This is youth. Klein stopped and looked into the distance before sighing wistfully. Such sights would no longer be seen in another week since school would break for summer. As he proceeded down a road sheltered by trees, Klein stopped by a 3-story stone building. He entered after successfully registering himself and easily found his way to the office of the person who had tended to him the other time. Knock, knock, knock. He knocked lightly on the half-closed door. Come in. A man's voice sounded from inside. A middle-aged instructor dressed in a white shirt and black tuxedo frowned when he saw Klein enter. There's another hour until the interview. Mr. Stone, do you still remember me? I'm a student of Senior Associate Professor Cohen, Klein Moretti. You have read my recommendation letter before. Klein smiled as he took off his hat. Harvin Stone stroked his black beard and asked, puzzled, is there something wrong? I'm not in charge of interviews. Here's the situation. I've already found a job, so I won't be participating in the interview today. Klein gave his reason for coming. I see. When Harvin Stone learned of the reason, he stood up and reached out his right hand. Congratulations. You are really a polite lad. I will inform the professor and senior associate professors. Klein shook Harvin's hand and planned on making a little small talk before bidding him farewell when he heard a familiar voice behind him. Moretti, you found another job? Klein turned around and saw an elder with a head of silver hair that left a deep impression on his silhouette. His deep, blue eyes sunk deep into his face and he had few wrinkles. The man looked sharp in his black tuxedo. Good afternoon, mentor. Mr. Azek, he hurriedly greeted. Why are the two of you here? The elder was none other than Senior Associate Professor of Coy University's History Department, who was also his mentor, Mr. Quentin Cohen. Beside Cohen was a middle-aged man with bronze-colored skin of average build. He did not have any facial hair and held a newspaper in his hand. His hair was black and his pupils brown. His facial features were soft as his eyes revealed an indescribable sense of weariness, like it had seen the vicissitudes of life. Beneath his right ear was a black mole which could only be seen if looked at carefully. Coy University recognized him since he was Coy University's History Department lecturer, Mr. Azik, who often helped the original Klein. He enjoyed debating with his mentor, Senior Associate Professor Cohen. They often had a clash of opinion, but even so, they were best friends. Otherwise, they would not have enjoyed meeting up for a chat. Cohen nodded and said with a relaxed tone, "Azik and I are here to participate in an academic conference." "What kind of job did you get?" "It's a security company which seeks, collects, and protects ancient relics. They were in need of a professional consultant and are paying me £3 a week." Klein repeated what he said to his sister yesterday. Following that, he explained, "As you know, I prefer exploring history, instead of summarizing it." Cohen nodded slightly and said, "Everyone has their own choices. I'm very happy that you bothered to come to Tingen University to inform them instead of just not showing up." At that moment, Azik interjected, "Klein, do you know what happened to Welch and Naya? I read on the newspapers that they were killed by burglars. The incident has become a case of armed burglary? And why it is already on the newspapers?" Klein was taken aback as he weighed over his words. "I'm not very clear of the specifics as well." Welch had obtained a diary of the Solomon Empire's Antigonus family from the Fourth Epoch. My help on interpreting it was sought. I helped them for the first few days, but I later got busy with job hunting. The police even came to me 2 days ago. He deliberately divulged the matter regarding the Solomon Empire and the Antigonus family in hopes of getting any information from the two history teachers. The Fourth Epoch, Cohen muttered with a frown. The bronze-skinned and weary eyes of Azik went blank first before he inhaled. He rubbed his temple with his newspaper-wielding left hand and said, "Antigonus, rings a bell. But why can't I remember?" As Klein walked down Zoutland and while taking in the warm, humid breeze, he suddenly realized something. He only had 3 pence of change. If he returned to Iron Cross Street via public carriage, it would cost him 4 pence. If he were to hand over a 1 gold pound note, it would be akin to using a $100 bull to buy a bottle of cheap mineral water back on Earth. There was nothing wrong with that, but it was just quite awkward to do so. Should I use 3 pence to travel 3 kilometers and walk the rest of the journey? Klein reached into his pocket with one hand as he slowed down his pace, considering other solutions. That won't do. Soon, he rejected the idea. It would take him a while to walk the remaining journey. Considering how he was carrying 12 pounds, a massive fortune, it was not safe. Furthermore, he had deliberately not brought the revolver with him, afraid that the Nighthawks would confiscate it. If he were to encounter the danger that instigated Welch's death, there was no way he could fight back. Get some change from a nearby bank? No, no way. There's a 0.5% processing fee. That's way too extravagant. Klein shook his head silently. Just the thought of the fees involved pained his heart. Having ruled out one solution after another, Klein's eyes suddenly lit up when he saw a clothing shop in front of him. That's right. Wouldn't the normal course of action be to buy something appropriately priced to get some change? A formal suit, shirt, vest, trousers, leather boots, and a cane were all within budget. They had to be bought sooner or later. Oh, it's very troublesome when fitting clothes. Besides, Benson knows more about this than me and he's better at bargaining. I should consider it only after he's back. Then should I buy a cane? That's right. As the saying goes, a cane is a gentleman's best choice of defense. It is half as good as a crowbar. A gun in one hand and a cane in the other is the combat style of a civilized person. After debating internally, Klein made up his mind. He turned around and entered the clothing shop, Wilker Clothing and Hats. The clothing store's layout resembled the clothing stores on Earth. The left wall was filled with rows of formal attires. The middle rows were decked with things like shirts, trousers, vests, and bow ties. On the right were leather shoes and boots placed inside glass cabinets. "Sir, may I help you?" A male salesperson dressed in a white shirt and red vest came over and asked politely. In Lowen Kingdom, rich and powerful gentlemen of high standing enjoyed wearing black suits comprising of white shirts matched with black vests and trousers. Their colors were relatively monotonous, so they required their male servants, salespeople, and service attendants to dress more brightly and colorfully, in order to distinguish themselves from their masters. In contrast, ladies and mistresses wore dresses of all kinds in glamorous fashions. As such, maid servants would wear black and white. Klein thought for a moment before answering the male salesperson's question. A cane. Something that's heavier and harder. The kind that can crack the skulls of others. The red-vested salesperson sized up Klein furtively before leading him into the store. He then pointed at a row of canes in the corner. That cane inlaid with gold is made of Ironheart wood. It's both very heavy and hard, and costs 11 solely 7 pence. Do you want to give it a try? 11 solely 7 pence? Why don't you go rob a bank? Big deal with the gold inlay. Klein was shocked by the price. With an unperturbed expression, he nodded gently. All right. The salesperson took down the Ironheart wood cane and carefully handed it to Klein, seemingly afraid that Klein would drop and break the merchandise. Klein took the cane and found it heavy. He tried moving with it and discovered that he could not sway it smoothly as he wanted. It's too heavy. Klein shook his head in relief. This is not an excuse. The salesperson took back the cane and pointed at another 3 canes. This is made of walnut wood, created by Tingen's most famous cane artisan, Mr. Hayes. It's priced at 10 solely 3 pence. This is made of ebony wood and inlaid with silver. It's as hard as iron, costing 7 solely 6 pence. This is made from the core of a white bolly tree and also inlaid with silver, costing 7 solely 10 pence. Klein tried each one of them and found them of appropriate weight. He then tapped them with his fingers to gain an understand of their hardness. Finally, he chose the cheapest one. I'll take the one made from ebony wood. Klein pointed at the cane with the silver inlay which the salesperson was holding. No problem, sir. Please follow me to proceed with the payment. In the future, if this cane is scuffed or stained, you can hand it to us for handling for free. The salesperson led Klein to the counter. Klein took the opportunity to release the 4 gold pound notes from his tight grip and removed 2 of the smaller denominations. Good day, sir. It will be 7 solely 6 pence. The cashier behind the counter greeted with a smile. Klein was planning on maintaining his gentlemanly image, but when he extended his hand with the 1 gold pound note, he could not help but ask, "Can I get a discount?" "Sir, what we have is all handcrafted, so our costs are very high." The salesperson beside him answered. "Since our boss isn't here, we are unable to lower the prices." The cashier behind the counter added, "Sir, sorry about that." All right. Klein handed the note over and received the black silver inlaid cane. While waiting for the change to be given to him, he took a few steps back and distanced himself from them. He swung around his sidearm as a test. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. The wind sounded heavy when the cane sliced through the air. Klein nodded in satisfaction. He looked forward again, prepared to see notes and coins, but was appalled to see the red-vested salesperson retreating far away. The cashier behind the counter had retracted into a corner, leaning close to a double-barreled shotgun hanging to the wall. The Lowen Kingdom had a semi-regulated policy on firearms. To possess a firearm, one needed to apply for an all-purpose weapon usage certificate or a hunter's license. Regardless of which type, one could still not be in possession of restricted military firearms such as repeaters, steam-pressured guns, or 6-barrel machine guns. An all-purpose weapon usage certificate could be used to purchase or store any kind of civilian firearm, but earning the certificate was extremely troublesome. Even merchants of substantial standing might not be approved. A hunter's license was relatively easy. Even farmers in the suburbs could receive approval. However, the license was limited to hunting guns with restricted numbers. People with sizable assets would tend to apply for one to use it for self-defense in emergency situations, such as now. Klein looked at the 2 wary salespeople as the corners of his mouth twitched. He chuckled dryly. Not bad. This cane is perfect for swinging. I'm very pleased. Realizing that he had no intention to assault them, the cashier behind the counter relaxed. He handed over the notes and coins he had taken out over with both hands. Klein took a look at what he received and saw 2 5 solely notes, 2 1 solely notes, a 5-pence coin, and a 1-penny coin. He could not help but nod inwardly. After a 2-second pause, he ignored the way the salespeople looked at him and unfurled the 4 notes towards the light to ensure that the anti-counterfeit watermarks were present. Klein put away the notes and coins when he was done. With the cane in hand, he tipped his hat and walked out of Wilker Clothing and Hats. He extravagantly spent 6 pence by taking a short-distance trackless carriage before transferring once before reaching home safe and sound. After closing the door, he counted the 11 pounds and 12 soldi notes thrice before placing them into the desk drawer. He then found the bronze revolver with the wooden grip. Clink! Clang! 5 brass bullets fell onto the table when Klein inserted the silver demon hunting bullets which had complicated patterns and the dark sacred emblem into the revolver cylinder. Like before, he only inserted 5 rounds and left an empty spot to prevent any misfires. The remaining rounds were placed together with the 5 ordinary bullets in a small iron case. Pa! He snapped the cylinder in place, giving him a sense of security. He excitedly lodged the revolver into the holster at his armpit and buckled it securely. Then, he repeatedly practiced unbuckling and drawing the gun. He rested whenever his arms ached, and this continued until sunset when he heard the sounds of tenants walking along the corridor outside. Phew! Klein let out a foul breath before putting his revolver back into his armpit holster. Only then did he take off his formal suit and vest. He wore back his usual brownish-yellow coat and swung his arms to relax them. Tap! 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 He heard the sound of nearing footsteps before the twisting sound of an inserted key. Melissa with her soft, black hair entered. Her nose twitched a little as she swept her gaze towards the unlit stove. The luster in her eyes dimmed slightly. Klein, I'll heat up the leftovers from last night. Benson will likely be home tomorrow. Melissa turned to look at her brother. Klein had his hands in his pocket as he leaned against the edge of the desk. He smiled and said, "No, let's eat out." Eat out? Melissa questioned in surprise. How does Silver Crown Restaurant at Daffodil Street sound? I heard they serve delicious food, suggested Klein. But, Melissa was still confused. Klein grinned and said, to celebrate my new job. You found a job? Melissa's voice rose unknowingly. But, isn't the Tingen University interview tomorrow? Another job. Klein gave a faint smile before fishing the stacked notes from the drawer. They even gave me an advance of 4 weeks' pay. Melissa looked at the gold pounds and soldi as she widened her eyes. Goddess? What job did you get? Klein's expression froze as he deliberated on his words. A security company whose mission is to seek, collect, and protect ancient relics. They were in need of a professional consultant. It's a 5-year contract, earning me £3 a week. Were you vexing over this last night? Asked Melissa after a moment of silence. Klein nodded. Yes, although being an academic at Tingen University is respectable, I prefer this job. Well, it isn't bad either. Melissa gave an encouraging smile. She asked half suspiciously and half curiously, why would they give you an advance payment of 4 full weeks? It's because we need to move. We need a place with more rooms and a bathroom that belongs to us, said Klein while grinning and shrugging. He felt that his smile was impeccable, just short of the word, surprised? Melissa was stunned momentarily before she suddenly spoke out in a fluster, Klein, we are living quite well now. My occasional grumblings of not having a personal bathroom is just a habit. Do you remember Jenny? She lived next door to us, but ever since her father was injured and lost his job, they had no choice but to move to Lower Street. The family of 5 ended up staying in one room, with 3 of them sleeping in a bunk bed and 2 of them sleeping on the ground. They even wished to rent the remaining empty spot to someone. Compared to them, we are really very lucky. Don't waste your salary on this matter. Besides, I love Mrs. Smurren's bakery. Sis, why is your reaction completely different from how it played out in my head? Klein's expression went blank when he heard his sister. While Isaac muttered to himself, he subconsciously shot a glance at Quentin Cohen, seemingly hoping for hints to jolt his memories. Cohen, with his deep-set blue eyes, shook his head without any hesitation. I do not have any impression of it. All right then. Perhaps it just shares a root word. Isaac lowered his left hand and gave a self-deprecating laugh. Klein was rather disappointed with the outcome, and he could not help but add on. Mentor, Mr. Isaac, as the both of you know, I'm very interested in exploring and restoring the history of the Fourth Epoch. If you ever recall anything or obtain relevant information, could you please write to me? No problem. As a result of Klein's actions today, the silver-haired senior associate professor was rather pleased with him. Isaac also nodded and said, is your address still the same as before? For now, but I'll be moving soon. I'll write a letter to inform you when the time comes, replied Klein in a respectful manner. Cohen shook his black cane and said, it's indeed about time you moved to a place with a better environment. At that moment, Klein caught a glance at the newspaper in Isaac's hand. He deliberated on his words before saying, Mentor, Mr. Isaac, what did the newspapers say regarding Welch and Naya? I only learned a little from the police who were in charge of the investigations. Azek was just about to answer when Cohen suddenly pulled out the pocket watch that was linked to his black tuxedo by a golden chain. Click. He opened the pocket watch and tapped his cane. The meeting is about to begin. Azek, we can't be delayed any further. Give the newspaper to Moretti. All right. Azek handed over the newspaper he had read to Klein. We will be going upstairs. Remember to write a letter. Our address has yet to change. It's still the Coy University History Department office. Ha ha. He laughed as he turned around and left the room with Cohen. Klein took off his hat and bowed. After watching the two gentlemen leave, he bade farewell to owner of the office, Harvin Stone. He proceeded across the corridor and slowly exited the gray three-story building. With his back against the sun, he lifted up his cane and unfolded the newspaper and saw the title, Tingen Morning Post. Tingen sure has all sorts of newspapers and magazines. There is the Morning Post, Evening Post, The Honest Paper, Backland Daily Tribune, Tussock Times, family magazines and book reviews. Klein casually recalled the several names that surfaced in his mind. Of course, a number of them were not local. They were distributed via steam locomotives. Now that the papermaking and printing industries were getting more advanced, the cost of a newspaper has already decreased to the price of a penny. The audience it reached also grew wider and wider. Klein did not scrutinize the details of the newspaper, quickly flipping to the news section with the report, Armed Burglary Murder. According to the police department, the scene at Mr. Welch's home was a horrible sight. There was missing gold, jewelry, and money, as well as anything valuable that could be easily taken away. Not even a penny was left behind. There is reason to believe that this was done by a merciless group of criminals that would not hesitate to kill the innocent, such as Mr. Welch and Madame Naya, if sight of their faces are caught. This is outright contempt for our kingdom's laws. This is a challenge to public security. No one wishes to have such an encounter. Of course, one piece of good news is that the police have located the murderer and captured the main culprit. We will do our best to provide news on any follow-ups. Reporter John Browning. The matter has been handled and covered up. As Klein walked through the boulevard, he nodded in a hardly noticeable manner. He flipped through the newspaper as he strolled down the path, reading the other news articles and serials in the process. Suddenly, he felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand, as though needles were stabbing at him. Someone is watching me? Observing me? Monitoring me? Various thoughts welled up in him as Klein had a faint realization. Back on Earth, he had once felt an invisible gaze before ultimately discovering the source of the gaze. However, it had never felt as crystal clear as what he was experiencing now. This was the same in the original Klein's memory fragments. Was it the transmigration or the mysterious luck enhancement ritual which enhanced my sixth sense? Klein fought back the urge to seek out the observer. Using his knowledge from reading novels and watching movies, he slowed his pace and put away the newspaper before looking toward Coy River. Following that, he acted as if he was admiring the scenery, slowly turning his head in different directions. He acted natural as he turned around, taking in everything with his eyes. Other than the trees, grassy plains, and students passing by in the distance, there was no other person there. But Klein was certain that someone was watching him. Klein's heart raced as his blood surged through his body with the intense thumping. He unfolded the papers and covered half his face, afraid that anyone would discover anything wrong with his expression. Meanwhile, he clenched his cane and readied himself to draw his gun. 1 step. 2 steps. 3 steps. Klein proceeded forward slowly. The feeling of being spied upon remained, but there was no sudden outburst of danger. He walked through the boulevard in a somewhat stiff manner and arrived at the waiting point for public carriages when a carriage pulled up coincidentally. Iron, Zoot? No, Champagne Street. Klein continually dismissed his thoughts. He originally planned on heading home immediately, but he was afraid of leading an observer of unknown motives to his apartment. Following that, he thought of heading to Zoutland Street to seek help from the Nighthawks or his colleagues. However, he thought otherwise, afraid that he would end up alerting his enemy and expose the Nighthawks. Therefore, he casually chose somewhere else. 6 pence, the ticketing officer replied routinely. Klein did not bring any gold pounds with him today. He had hidden the money in the usual spot and had only taken 2 soldi notes with him. And before he came, he had spent the same amount of money, leaving him with 1 soldi 6 pence. Therefore, he took out all his coins and handed to the ticketing officer. He found a seat after boarding the carriage, and finally with the closing of the carriage doors, Klein felt that unease of being watched vanish. He exhaled slowly as he felt his limbs tingle slightly. What do I do? What should I do next? Klein looked out the carriage as he racked his brains for a solution. Until he was clear about the intentions of the person watching him, Klein had to assume that there was malicious intent. Many thoughts sprang up in his mind, but he dismissed them. He had never experienced such an event, and had to use a few minutes to organize his ideas. He had to notify the Nighthawks, only they could truly get rid of this threat. But I can't head there directly or I might expose them. Perhaps that might be their goal. Following this train of thought, Klein crudely surmised various possibilities as his thoughts turned clearer. FFFFFFFF. He exhaled as he regained some semblance of composure. He looked seriously at the scenery outside flying past him. There were no accidents along the way to Champagne Street, but when Klein opened the door and stepped out of the car, he immediately had the uneasy feeling of being watched again. He acted as though he had not sensed anything. He took the newspaper and his cane, slowly making his way in the direction of Zoutland Street. But he did not enter that street. Instead, he took another route to the Red Moonlight Street behind. There was a beautiful white plaza there, as well as a large cathedral with a pointy roof. St. Selena Cathedral, the Tingen headquarters of the Church of the Evernight Goddess. As a believer, there was nothing odd about him participating in Mass or pray on his day off. The cathedral exhibited a design similar to Earth's Gothic style. It also had a tall, black, and imposing clock tower, situated between blue and red checkered windows. Klein stepped into the cathedral and followed an aisle into the prayer hall. Along the way, the stained windows were comprised of red and blue glass patterns that allowed colored light to shine into the hall. The blue was closer to black, the red the same color as the crimson moon. It made the surroundings seem unusually dark and mysterious. The feeling of being watched vanished. Klein acted unfazed as he walked toward the open prayer hall. There were no high windows here. The deep darkness was emphasized, but behind the arc-shaped holy altar, on the wall directly opposite the door, were about 20 circular fist-sized holes that allowed the radiant sunlight to enter the hall. It was akin to pedestrians seeing the starry sky when suddenly looking up into the dark night to see the shimmering stars in all their nobility, purity, and holiness. Even though Klein had always believed that gods could be analyzed and understood, he could not help but lower his head here. The bishop was preaching in a gentle tone as Klein silently made his way down the aisle that split the pews into two columns. He searched for an empty area close to the passageway before slowly taking a seat. Leaning his cane onto the back of the pew in front of him, Klein took off his hat and placed it onto his lap together with the newspaper. Then he clasped his hands together and lowered his head. The entire process was done slowly and routinely as though he was really there to pray. Klein closed his eyes as he silently listened to the bishop's voice in the darkness. Lacking clothes and food, they have no covering in the cold. They are drenched by rains, and huddle around the rocks for lack of shelter. They are orphans snatched from the breast, hope lost on them. They are the poor that have been forced off the proper path. The Evernight did not forsake them, but bestowed them with love less than sup greater than one less than sup greater than. Echoes amplified as they entered his ear. Klein saw a swath of darkness in front of him as he felt his spirit and mind cleansed. He calmly took it in until the bishop finished his preachings and ended Mass. After which, the bishop opened a confessional door beside him. Men and women began lining up. Klein opened his eyes and donned his hat once more. With his cane and newspaper, he stood up and found his place in line. It was his turn after more than 20 minutes. He stepped in and closed the door behind him. There was darkness in front of him. "My child, what do you wish to say?" The bishop's voice sounded from behind the wooden damper screen. Klein took out the 7th Unit, Special Operations Department, badge from his pocket and handed it over to the bishop through an opening. "Someone is tailing me. I wish to find Dunn Smith." As though he had been infected by the silent darkness, his tone turned softer as well. The bishop took the badge and after a few seconds of silence, he said, "Turn right from the confession booth and walk to the end. There will be a secret door to the side. Someone will lead the way after you enter." As he spoke, he pulled a rope inside the room, causing a particular priest to hear a chime. Klein retrieved his badge and took off his hat and pressed it to his chest. He gave a slight bow before turning around and exiting. After confirming that the feeling of being watched was gone, he wore his halved-top hat. Without any excessive emotions, he held his cane and turned right, until he arrived by an arched altar. He found the secret door in the wall facing his side. He silently opened it before sneaking in quickly. The secret door closed silently as a middle-aged, black-robed priest appeared under the illumination of gas lamps. "What is it?" the priest asked tersely. Klein showed his badge and repeated what he said to the bishop. The middle-aged priest did not ask further questions. He turned around and proceeded forward in silence. Klein nodded and took off his hat. With his black cane, he followed silently in tow. Roseanne had once mentioned that heading left from the crossroads towards Channey's Gate would reach St. Selena Cathedral. Exclamation mark. Report chapter. Tap, tap, tap. The sound of footsteps echoed through the dark, narrow corridor, which was otherwise silent. Klein kept his back straight as he kept up with the priest's pace. He did not pose questions or chat idly with him, remaining silent like a windless body of water. After passing through the heavily guarded passageway, the priest opened a secret door with a key and pointed down a stairwell made of stone. Turn left at the intersection to reach Channey's Gate. May Goddess bless you. Klein gestured the sign of the crimson moon on his chest. Commoners practiced etiquette, while the religious partook in ritual blessings. Praise the Lady. The priest returned with the same gesture. Klein did not speak further as he walked down the dark stone stairwell with the aid of the refined inlaid gas lamps on both sides of the wall. Midway, he subconsciously turned back and saw the priest standing at the entrance. He was in the shadows and appeared like an immobile wax statue. Klein looked away and continued to proceed down. It did not take long before he hit ground laid with ice-cold stone slabs. This led him to the intersection. He did not turn towards Channey's Gate because Dunn Smith, who had recently finished his shift, was definitely not there. He turned right and saw the familiar path. Klein went back up another flight of stairs and appeared inside Blackthorn Security Company. Seeing doors that were tightly shut or half closed, he did not rush into them. Instead, he went to the reception and saw a brown-haired girl focused on a magazine with a sweet smile. Hi, Roseanne. Klein came to her side and deliberately rapped the table. Knock. Roseanne stood up suddenly and knocked over a chair and said in a fluster, Hi, nice weather today. Why you, Klein, why are you here? She patted her chest and heaved a few sighs of relief. She was like a young lady afraid that her father had caught her skiving. I need to find Captain, answered Klein simply. You gave me a fright. I thought Captain came out. Roseanne glared at Klein. Don't you know how to knock? HMPH, you should be thankful that I'm a tolerant and kind woman. Well, I do prefer the term lady. Is there a reason why you are looking for Captain? He's in the room opposite Mrs. Oriana. Even though he felt uptight, Klein was so amused by Roseanne he smiled. He pondered for a moment before saying, a secret. Quote ellipsis quote. Roseanne's eyes widened and while she reeled in her disbelief, Klein did a slight bow before bidding her farewell. He went through the reception's partition and knocked on the door of the first office on the right. Come in. Dunn Smith's deep and gentle voice sounded. Klein pushed the door and opened before closing the door behind him. He took off his hat and bowed. Good morning, Captain. Good morning, how can I help you? Dunn's black windbreaker and hat were hanging on a clothes stand to his side. He was dressed in a white shirt and black vest. Even though his hairline was rather high, his gray eyes were deep, and he appeared much fresher. Someone is following me, Klein honestly answered without any embellishments. Dunn leaned back and clasped his hands together. His deep gray eyes silently looked at Klein's eyes. He did not follow up on the topic of being followed and instead, asked, You came from the cathedral? Yes. Klein answered. Dunn nodded gently. He did not comment on its merits or demerits as he switched the subject back. It might be that Welch's father doesn't believe the cause of death that we reported and had hired a private investigator from Wind City to investigate the matter. Midseashire's Constant City was also known as Wind City. It was a region with extremely advanced coal and steel industries. It was one of the top 3 cities of Lowen Kingdom. Before waiting for Klein to give his opinion, Dunn continued, it might also be a result of that notebook. Hey, we happened to be investigating where Welch received the Antigonus family's notebook. Of course, we can't eliminate other people or organizations that might be seeking out this notebook. What should I do? Klein asked in a serious voice. Without a question, he hoped that it was the first reason. Dunn did not immediately answer him. He raised his coffee mug and took a mouthful, his eyes not showing the sliver of a ripple. Return the way you came, then do anything you wish. Anything? Klein returned with a question. Anything. Dunn nodded with certainty. Of course, do not scare them off or violate the law. All right. Klein took a deep breath and bade him farewell. He left the room and went back underground. He turned left at the intersection, and bathed in the light from the gas lamps on the 2 walls, he arrived silently to the empty, dark, and cold passageway. The sound of his footsteps echoed, making him sound more alone and terrified. Soon, Klein arrived at the stairwell. He went forward and saw a shadow standing there, the middle-aged priest. The two did not say a word when they met. The priest turned around in silence and made way. He proceeded silently before returning to the prayer hall. The circular holes behind the arched altar were still as pure and bright, while the darkness and silence of the building's interior remained. There were still men and women lining outside the confessional, but much fewer than before. After waiting for a moment, Klein slowly left the prayer hall with his cane and newspaper as though nothing had ever happened, successfully leaving St. Selena Cathedral. The moment he walked out, he saw the burning sun. He immediately regained the familiar feeling of being observed. He felt like he was prey being eyed by a hawk. Suddenly, a question surfaced in his mind. Why didn't the observer follow me into the cathedral? Although I could have still used the dark environment and the priest to conceal my temporary disappearance, would it be hard for him to continue monitoring me by pretending to pray? If he had not done something wrong, there would be no problem walking in with an open and above-board manner, right? Unless the person has some dark history, making him afraid of the church or fear the bishop, knowing that he might have the powers of a Beander. In that case, the likelihood of it being a private investigator is very slim. Klein exhaled and no longer acted as nervous as he was previously. He took a casual stroll before going around and to the back of Zoutland Street. He stopped at an ancient-styled building with mottled walls. The address on the door was 3. Its name was the Zoutland Shooting Club. Part of the police department's underground shooting range was open to the public as a way to earn some additional funds. Klein went in and the feeling of being watched vanished instantly. He took this opportunity to hand over his Special Operations Department badge to the attendant. After a short verification, he was led underground to a small, confined shooting range. 10-meter target. Klein informed the attendant simply. Next, he retrieved the revolver from his armpit holster and the box of brass bullets from his pocket. The feeling of being suddenly targeted made his desire to protect himself win over his procrastination. Therefore, he could not wait to come over to practice his shooting. Pa! After the attendant left, he flicked open the cylinder and removed the silver demon hunting bullets. Following that, he filled the cylinder with normal brass bullets. This time, neither did he leave an empty spot to prevent misfiring, nor did he take off his formal attire and have top hat. He planned on practicing in his usual getup. After all, it was impossible for him to shout, "Wait a minute, let me change into something more comfortable," after encountering an enemy or danger. Click. Klein closed the cylinder and rolled it with his thumb. Suddenly, he held the gun in both hands, raised it up straight, and aimed at the target more than 10 meters away. However, he was in no hurry to shoot. Instead, he recalled his experience at military training less than sup greater than 1 less than sup greater than, how to form a line with the iron sights, and knowledge about a gun's recoil. Rustle, rustle. While his clothes rustled, Klein repeated his aiming and his holding stance. He was as serious as a student taking a high school exam. After repeating it several times, he retreated to the wall and sat down on a long, soft bench. He placed the revolver to the side, began massaging his arms, and rested for quite a while. He spent a few minutes recalling his practice before he picked up the revolver with the wooden handle and bronze cylinder. He got into standard firing position and pulled the trigger. Bang! His arm trembled as his body moved back from the recoil. The bullet missed the target. Bang! 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 Drawing from the experience he gained, he shot again and again until all 6 rounds were finished. I'm starting to hit the target. Klein stepped back and sat down again as he exhaled. Click. He swung the cylinder out and allowed the 6 shells to fall to the ground. Then, without a change in expression, he inserted the remaining brass rounds in. After relaxing his arm, Klein stood up again and returned to his shooting position. Bang! 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 Ringing shots echoed as the target shook. Klein practiced and rested repeatedly. He expended all 30 normal rounds and the remaining 5 from before. He gradually hit the target and started aiming for the bull's eye. He swung his sore shoulders and threw out the final 5 shells. He lowered his head and inserted the demon hunting bullets with the complicated patterns back into gun, leaving an empty spot to prevent misfiring. After putting the revolver back into his armpit holster, Klein patted the dust from his body and walked out the shooting range to return to the streets. The feeling of being observed arose once again. Klein felt calmer than he previously felt as he slowly walked to Champagne Street. He spent 4 pence on a tracked carriage to return to Iron Cross Street before returning to his own apartment. The feeling of being spied upon vanished without a trace. Klein took out his keys and opened the door to see a short-haired man nearing his 30s and wearing a linen shirt seated at a desk. His heart tensed up before relaxing immediately. Klein greeted with a smile, "Good morning, no, good afternoon, Benson." This man was none other than Klein's and Melissa's elder brother, Benson Moretti. He was only 25 this year, but his receding hairline and decrepit appearance made him look nearly 30. He had black hair and brown eyes, resembling Klein somewhat, but he lacked the faint scholarly air which Klein had. "Good afternoon, Klein. How was the interview?" Benson stood up as he grinned. His black coat and halved top hat were hanging on a protrusion of their bunk bed. "Horrible," Klein replied in a deadpan manner. When he saw Benson stunned, Klein chuckled and added, "In fact, I didn't even participate in the interview. I found a job ahead of the interview and it pays £3 a week." He repeated what he told Melissa again. Benson's expression calmed down as he shook his head with a laugh. "It feels like I'm seeing a child grow up. Well, this job is pretty good." He sighed and said, "It's great that the first thing I heard is such good news after being away for work." "Let's celebrate tonight and buy some beef?" Klein smiled. "Sure, but I believe Melissa will feel the pinch. Let's buy some ingredients later in the afternoon? Let's bring at least 3 soli? Well, to be honest, a pound exchanges for 20 soli, and 1 soli exchanges for 12 pence. There are even denominations like the halfpence and quarterpence. Such a coin system just goes against logic. It's so troublesome. I think it must be one of the most foolish coin system in the world." When he said that, he saw Benson's expression turn stern. Feeling a little unease, he wondered if he had said anything wrong. Could it be that in the lost memory fragments of the original Klein, Benson was an outright, extreme nationalist who showed no tolerance for any negativity? Benson took a few steps and refuted him with a stern expression. "No, it is not one of, but the most foolish coin system." "Not one of." Klein was taken aback, but he quickly snapped to his senses. He looked at his brother in the eye and laughed. Indeed, Benson was great at mocking humor. Benson lifted the corners of his lips and said in all seriousness, "You should understand that to institute a reasonable and simple coin system, one needs to know how to count and grasp the decimal system. Unfortunately, there are too few talents among those important figures. It's simply sharp and incisive." Klein burst out in laughter. Using the rich experience he had from his previous incarnation, he added another insult. "In fact, there is no evidence to suggest that those important figures have any brains at all." "Good. Very good." Benson roared with laughter as he gave a thumbs up. "Klein, you are a lot more humorous than before." After taking a breath, he continued, "I have to go to the pier in the afternoon. I'm only off work tomorrow. After that I'll have time to go to Tingen City Housing Improvement Company with the both of you. Let's see if they have cheap and good terrace houses for rent. Also, I need to pay Mr. Frankie a visit." "Our landlord?" the perplexed Klein asked. "Does our current landlord have some terrace houses from pretty good districts under his name?" Benson shot his brother a glance and said, amused, "Have you forgotten the 1-year rental contract we have with him? It has only been 6 months. Hiss. Klein immediately drew a gasp of cold air. He had really forgotten the matter. Although rent was paid once a week, the lease was a year long. If they were to move now, it was equivalent to a breach in contract. If they were taken to court, they would have to compensate large sums of money. You are still lacking in societal experience." Benson touched his receding black hairline and said wistfully, "This was a clause I fought so hard back then. If not, Mr. Frankie was only willing to lease it to us for 3 months each contract. To those with money, landlords would sign leases for a year, 2 years, or even 3 years to seek stable income. But for us, the past us, and our neighbors, landlords would have to be constantly worried that something bad might happen, depriving them of their rent. Therefore, they would only sign short-term contracts. In that case, they can offer to raise prices according to the situation." Klein summarized and added, using the original Klein's memories and his own experience as a tenant. Benson sighed and said, "This is the cruel reality of today's society. All right, you don't have to worry. The issue with the contract can be easily resolved. To be frank, even if we owe him a week's rent, Mr. Frankie would have immediately thrown us out and confiscated whatever valuable items we have. After all, his intelligence is below that of a monkey's. There's no way he can comprehend overly complicated matters." Upon hearing this, Klein suddenly recalled a particular Sir Humphrey's meme. He shook his head and said seriously, "No, Benson. You are wrong." "Why?" Benson was puzzled. Mr. Frankie's intelligence is still slightly higher than a monkey's, Klein replied in all seriousness. Just as Benson seemed to smile in response, he added, if he is on form. Ha ha. Benson lost it and burst out in laughter. After a series of rapturous laughter, he pointed at Klein, momentarily unable to put his thoughts in words. Only then, he returned to the topic at hand. Of course, as a gentleman, we cannot employ such shameless tactics. I will discuss this with Mr. Frankie tomorrow. Believe me, he's easily convinced, easily. Klein had no doubts regarding Benson's point. The existence of the gas pipes was excellent proof. After some idle chatter between the brothers, the remnants of pan-fried fish from the previous night were made into a soup with some vegetables. During the boiling process, the steam moistened the rye bread. Smearing a little butter on the bread, Klein and Benson had a simple meal, but they were very satisfied with it. After all, the fragrance and sweetness of butter brought them endless aftertastes. After Benson left, Klein headed to the lettuce and meat market with 3 solely notes and some spare pennies. He spent 6 pence on a pound of beef and 7 pence on a fresh and succulent fish with few bones. Additionally, he bought potatoes, peas, radishes, rhubarbs, lettuce, and turnips, as well as spices such as rosemary, basil, cumin, and cooking oils. During this entire time, he continued to feel like he was being watched, but there was no physical interaction. After spending some time at Smyrna Bakery, Klein returned home and began weightlifting with heavier items such as books to train his arm strength. He had planned to exercise by military boxing, which he learned from his compulsory military stint for students. However, he had already forgotten the radio exercise routines from school, much less boxing, which was only taught during the military stints. Exasperated, he could only do something simpler. Klein did not overexert himself since it would lead to fatigue and thus put him in greater danger. He took an appropriate break and began reading the original Klein's notes and study material. He wished to read anything regarding the fourth epoch again. In the evening, Benson and Melissa sat in front of a desk. The food was placed neatly like children in upper primary school. The fragrances of the dishes were composed of a rich melody of scents: the soul-captivating fragrance of the stewed beef, the obviously tender potatoes, the sweetness of the thick pea soup, the mellow flavors of the stewed rhubarb, and the sweetness of the buttered rye bread. Benson gulped a mouthful of saliva as he turned around to see Klein placing a crispy fish onto a plate. He felt the fragrance of the oil permeate through his nostrils into his throat and then into his stomach. Groan. His stomach made a distinct protest. Klein rolled up his sleeves and held up a plate of fried fish before placing it in the middle of the tidied desk. Following that, he returned to the cupboard and took out 2 large cups of ginger beer and placed them where he and Benson sat. He smiled at Melissa and took out a lemon pudding as if he were performing a magic trick. We'll have beer, while you'll have this. Thank you. Melissa took the lemon pudding. When Benson saw this, he raised his calm and said with a smile, "This is to celebrate Klein's finding of a decent job." Klein raised his cup and clinked it with Benson before clinking it with Melissa's lemon pudding. Praise the lady. Gulp. He tilted his head back and drank it down. The spicy feeling warmed his gullet, bringing him great aftertastes. Despite its name, ginger beer did not contain any alcohol. It was a mixture of the ginger's spiciness and the sourness of lemon that made it taste similar to beer. It was a kind of beverage that both women and children found acceptable. However, Melissa did not like the taste of it. Praise the lady. Benson drank a mouthful as well while Melissa took a nibble of the lemon pudding. She chewed at it repeatedly before swallowing it down unwillingly. Give it a try. Klein put down his cup and picked up his fork and spoon and pointed at the tableful of food. He was most pessimistic of his thick pea soup. After all, he had never eaten something so strange on Earth. All he could do was adapt the recipe from the original Klein's memory fragments. As the eldest brother, Benson did not stand on ceremony as he dug up a spoonful of mashed potatoes and stuffed it into his mouth. The beaten potatoes were boiled thoroughly and mixed with the faint taste of lard and just enough salt. It whetted his appetite and made him salivate. Not bad. Not bad, praised Benson vaguely. It's much more delicious than the one I had back at work. They only used butter. This is one of my specialties after all. Klein accepted the praise. It's all thanks to the teachings of the chef at Welch's Place. Melissa looked at the beef soup. The green basil leaves, the green lettuce heads, and the radishes were submerged in the colorless soup, covering the tender beef. The soup was clear and its fragrance tantalizing. She forked a piece of beef and placed it in her mouth to chew. The beef retained a little chewiness despite being stewed tender. The mixture of salt, the sweetness from the radishes, and the spiciness from the basil leaves complemented the deliciousness of the beef. She seemed to give her approbation, but she could not stop her chewing. Klein tasted it and felt that although it was delicious, it was not without regret. This was still far from his usual standard. After all, he was lacking in certain condiments and could only use replacements. It was no wonder it tasted different. Of course, even with the best standards, one could only make do with the dishes they cooked personally. Suddenly, his heart pained for Benson and Melissa, who were stunted in their world view. After swallowing a piece of beef, Klein picked up a piece of fried tussock fish which was sprinkled with cumin and rosemary. It was crispy on the outside and tender on the inside. The char was a perfect golden brown and the saltiness and oil fragrance intertwined as one. Nodding slightly, Klein tried a piece of stewed rhubarb and found it palatable. It got rid of the cloyed taste of meat. Finally, he mustered his courage and scooped a bowl of thick pea soup. Too sweet and too sour. Klein could not help but frown. However, after seeing Benson and Melissa looking satisfied from tasting it, he began suspecting his tastes. He could not help but down a mouthful of ginger beer to cleanse his tongue. The siblings were stuffed by the end of the meal. They laid slumped in the chairs for quite a while. Let us praise the lady once more. Benson raised his ginger beer, which had only one mouthful left, as he said in satisfaction. Praise the lady. Klein downed the last bit of his beverage. Praise the lady. Melissa finally put the last bit of lemon pudding into her mouth and enjoyed the flavor swishing through her mouth. When Klein saw this, he took advantage of his tipsiness and smiled. Melissa, that's not right. You should eat the thing you find most delicious thing at the beginning. That way, you can fully appreciate its most delicious aspects. Tasting it when you are filled and satiated will not do the food justice. No, it's still as delicious as it can be, answered Melissa firmly and stubbornly. The siblings had a happy chat, and after digesting their meals, they cleaned up the plates, cutlery, and stored the oil which was used to fry the fish. After busying themselves, it was revision time. One refreshed his accounting knowledge while another continued reading the study material and notes. Time was spent to its fullest. At 11, the siblings extinguished the gas lamp and went to bed after washing up. Klein felt groggy as he stared at the darkness in front of him. A figure wearing a black windbreaker and half-top hat appeared suddenly in Klein's vision. It was Dunn Smith. Captain. Klein jolted awake and knew he was dreaming. Dunn's gray eyes remained calm, as though he was mentioning something trivial. Someone has sneaked into your room. Pick up your revolver and force him to the corridor. Leave the rest to us. Someone has sneaked into my room? The observer has finally taken action? Klein jumped in fright, but did not dare ask further. All he did was nod and say, all right. The scene before his eyes changed immediately as a swath of colors appeared like the bursting of bubbles. Klein's eyes opened as he carefully turned his head. He looked toward the window and saw a thin but unfamiliar back standing at his desk, rummaging for something in silence. Badum, badum, badum. Klein's heart began beating rapidly. It shrank into a clump before expanding abruptly. It made his body tremble gently. There was an instant when he nearly forgot what he had to do until the lurking figure suddenly paused. The figure pricked his ears slightly as though listening for any changes. Blood flowed back from his brain as Klein regained his basic cognitive abilities. He reached beneath the pillow for the wooden grip of the revolver. He felt the firm but smooth feeling as he rapidly calmed down. He silently and slowly pulled out the revolver and aimed it at the trespasser's head. To be honest, he had no confidence in striking the intruder. Although he was already able to stably hit the target during practice, a moving person and a fixed target were completely different. He was not arrogant enough to confound the two together. However, he vaguely remembered something from his previous life. The general idea was that a nuclear weapon wielded the greatest strength before its launch. The principle held in his current situation. The best deterrence was before he shot. By not pulling the trigger or shooting blindly, the intruder was unable to determine whether or not he was a complete rookie who had an extremely high chance of missing him. His worries and fears would make him deliberate more, resulting in him restraining himself. In an instant, another thought arose in him. It immediately made Klein turn decisive. He was not the kind of person who turned calmer when faced with danger. Instead, he had already imagined the situation when he faced the observer, using intimidation instead of attacking. The Foodaholic Empire had an idiom: where there is precaution there will be no danger. When Klein pointed his gun at the intruder, the thin man froze suddenly, as though he had sensed something. Following that, he heard a voice that hid a chuckle. "Good evening, sir." The scrawny man clasped both his hands together, and his body seemed to tense. Klein sat on the lower bunk, aimed the person's head with the revolver, and tried to speak as leisurely and as naturally as he could. "Please raise both of your hands and turn around. Try to do it slow. To be frank, I am very timid and I get nervous easily. If you move too quickly, I can be frightened, and I can't guarantee that there won't be a situation where I misfire." "Yes, that's right." The scrawny man raised both of his hands and held them up near his head before turning his body bit by bit. The first thing that came into view was a black tight suit with neat buttons. Next, he caught a pair of brown eyebrows that were thick and sharp. The intruder's deep blue eyes didn't reflect fear, but rather gazed upon Klein with the intensity of a ferocious beast. It seemed that if Klein were careless for a second, the other person would leap forward and tear him to pieces. He clenched the handle tightly as he tried his best to appear calm and indifferent. It was only when the thin man faced him completely did Klein jerk his chin towards the door. He softly and gently said, "Sir, let's take this outside. Do not disturb the beautiful dreams of others. Oh, do keep your motion slow. Lighten your footsteps a little too. It's basic courtesy for a gentleman." The thin man's cold pupils rolled as he swept Klein a glance. He continued raising his hands as he walked slowly to the door. Under the revolver's aim, he twisted the handle and slowly opened the door. When the door was half opened, he suddenly lowered himself and rolled forward. The door was pulled by a strong wind and it closed with a slam. Benson, who was on the top bunk, was stirred. He almost woke up in a daze. At that moment, a leisurely and serene melody entered from outside. The heavy and comfortable voice started to sing. "Oh, the threat of horror, the hope of crimson cries. One thing at least is certain, that this life flies. One thing is certain, and the rest is lies. The flower that once has bloomed forever dies less than sup greater than one less than sup greater than." The poem seemed to possess the power to calm and relax others. Benson, who was on the top bunk, and Melissa, who was in another room, again fell asleep amid their grogginess. Klein's body and mind was also peaceful and quiet. He nearly yawned. The way the thin man had darted off was so agile that he could not react in time. Looking at the closed door, he smiled and muttered to himself. You might not believe it, but pulling the trigger would not release a round. The empty chamber to prevent misfiring. Following that, Klein listened to the midnight poem as he patiently awaited for the battle outside to end. Within a minute, the tranquil melody which resembled the reflection of moonlight on the surface of a lake stopped, and the dark night resumed its deep silence. Klein silently spun the cylinder and moved the empty chamber away as he awaited for the outcome. He uneasily waited for a full 10 minutes. Just as he wondered if he should investigate, he heard Dunsmith's staid and warm voice from the door. "It's settled. Phew." Klein exhaled. He held his revolver and took his key. Barefooted, he carefully approached the door before silently opening it to see the black windbreaker and the halved top hat. Dunsmith was standing there with his deep and calm grey eyes. He closed the door behind him and followed Dunn to the end of the corridor and stood amid the weak crimson moonlight. "It took me some time to enter his dream," said Dunn calmly as he looked at the red moon outside the window. "Do you know his background?" Klein felt a lot more relieved. Dunn nodded and said, "An ancient organization known as the Secret Order. They were established in the Fourth Epoch and are related to the Solomon Empire and a number of fallen aristocrats of that period. Hey, the Antigonus family's diary came from them. Due to a member's negligence, it entered the antique market and was obtained by Welch. They had no choice but to send people in search of it." Without waiting for Klein's question, he paused before continuing. "We will capture the remaining members they have according to the clues. Well, it might not end too well. These fellows are as good at hiding as the rats in the sewers. But at the very least, they would believe that we have likely obtained the Antigonus family's notebook or that we have obtained a critical clue. In that case, as long as it's not something extremely crucial or important, they would abandon the operation. That is their philosophy on surviving." "What if the notebook is extremely crucial and important?" asked Klein worriedly. Dunn smiled without an answer. Instead, he said, "We know very little of the Secret Order. Our success this time is all thanks to your sharp wits. This contribution is all yours. In light of the possibility of hidden dangers and how heightened perception would aid in finding the notebook, you have a chance at choosing." "A chance at choosing?" Klein vaguely guessed something as his breathing subconsciously turned heavy. Dunn wiped the smile from his face as he said in all seriousness, "Do you wish to become a Beyander?" You can only choose the starting sequence of an incomplete sequence. Of course, you can give up this chance and choose to accumulate the merit you have garnered. Then, all you have to do is wait till there's sufficient room for you to become a sleepless, which is also the first, complete sequence the goddess has bestowed on the Nighthawks. Indeed, Klein felt delighted and did not have any hesitant emotions. He took the initiative to ask, then from which of the sequence 9s can I choose from? I have to have detailed information to decide whether to give up or accept, as well as choose which one. Dunn turned around and seemed to be cloaked in the crimson veil that shone down on him. He looked into Klein's eyes and said slowly, apart from the sleepless, the Church has 3 sequence 9 potion formulas. One of them is Mystery Prior, which is also the power Old Neil controls. Hey, Roseanne has likely mentioned this to you. She can never hold her tongue. Klein smiled awkwardly, at a loss for an answer. Thankfully, Dunn did not mind it as he continued. Our Mystery Prior potion formula and the later sequences that aren't directly chained were obtained from the Moses Ascetic Order. Back then, it was said that they had yet to fall to corruption. They persisted in their morals and precepts, determined in their pursuit of knowledge. They kept their secrets strictly confidential. Anyone that entered the order would be barred from speaking for 5 years after becoming a mystery prior. They would learn to keep silent, so as to cultivate and enhance their focus. The motto of Moses Ascetic Order, do as you wish, but do no harm, began from them. Mystery priors have a comprehensive but rudimentary understanding and grasp of magic, witchcraft, astrology, and other mystical knowledge. They also know a fair number of magical rituals, but they can easily sense certain existences that hide among matter. Therefore, they have to be careful and show respect to their powers as a Beyonder. We lack a large portion of this sequence, causing it to be an incomplete chain. For example, it's sequence 8. Of course, perhaps the Holy Cathedral has it. This pretty much meets all my requirements. Klein nodded slightly, to the point of having the urge to choose. Thankfully, he still remembered certain things. What about the other 2? The second type is named Corpse Collector. Quite a number of cultists who worship death in the southern continent choose it. After consuming the potion, unintelligent dead spirits would mistake them as one of their kind and not attack them. They would gain resistance to the cold, decay, and corrosiveness of cadaveric auras. They will be able to directly see a portion of evil spirits and see the characteristics and weaknesses of undead creatures, as well as gain certain attribute enhancements. We have the sequence 8 and sequence 7 that follows it. Heh, you probably can guess sequence 7, Spirit Medium. This was chosen by Daly back then, described Dunn in detail. Spirit Medium does appear mysterious and cool, but what I want most is to grasp knowledge of mysticism. Klein did not interject. All he did was listen quietly. Dunn Smith looked sideways at the Crimson Moon and said, we only have sequence 9 of the third type. Whether the Holy Cathedral has it, I'm not sure. It's called Seer. Seer? Klein's pupils constricted as he recalled the regret Emperor Russell had left in his diary. He regretted not choosing less than sup greater than 2 less than, sup greater than an apprentice, bandit, or seer. Klein tried his best to remain his usual self as he asked with genuine interest, what abilities do seers have? Your question is inaccurate. The question should be, what abilities does consuming the seer potion give? Dunn Smith shook his head and chuckled. His gray pupils and face turned away from the moon as his features hid in the shadows. There are many kinds of things involved: astromancy, cartomancy, spiritual pendulums, and scrying. Of course, it does not mean that consuming the potion will immediately allow you to grasp all of them. The potion only equips you with the qualifications and ability to learn it. As they lack direct means of fighting enemies, hey, you can probably imagine that setting up a magical ritual requires a lot of preparation. It's not suitable for combat. Therefore, in terms of knowledge of mysticism, a seer will be more learned and professional than a mystery prior. It sounds like it matches my requirements as well. However, the lack of means to directly deal with enemies is quite a dilemma. Furthermore, the Church of the Evernight Goddess likely doesn't have the subsequent sequences. The Holy Cathedral likely refers to the headquarters, the Cathedral of Serenity. The means available to low-sequence Beyonders against their enemies might not be comparable to firearms. Klein fell into deep thought as he racked his brains. He kept going back and forth between mystery priors and seers. He no longer considered Corpse Collector. Dunn Smith smiled when he saw this. You don't have to rush into a decision. Tell me your answer Monday morning. Regardless of your choice of sequence or giving up this opportunity, none of us from the Nighthawks would have any other thoughts on the matter. Calm down and ask your heart. With that said, he took off his hat and bowed slightly. He slowly walked past Klein and headed for the stairwell. Klein did not say a word and did not immediately reply. He silently bowed and watched as Dunn left. Although he was constantly hoping to become a Beyonder previously, he was thrown into a dilemma when the opportunity arose. The subsequent missing sequences, Beyonders having the risk of losing control, the believability of Emperor Russell's diaries, and the illusory murmurs that could corrupt people into madness all mixed together and formed a moat that obstructed his advancement. He took a deep breath and slowly breathed out. No matter how bad it is, it can't be worse than making an 18-year-old high school student decide on his future career. Klein gave a self-deprecating chuckle. Gathering his scattered thoughts, he opened the door softly and laid back on the bed. He laid there with his eyes open, silently looking at the bottom of the top bunk that was dyed with the faint crimson of the moon. A drunkard staggered outside the window as a carriage sped down the empty streets. These noises did not break the serenity of the night but instead made it even darker and more distant. Klein's emotions settled down as he recalled his past on Earth. He recalled how he liked exercising, his father who always spoke loudly, his mother who enjoyed busying herself despite having a chronic disease, his friends who grew up with him, going from playing sports like soccer and basketball to games and mahjong, as well as the person he made a failed confession to. These were like a silent river. It did not have many ripples or deep sentimental feelings, but it silently drowned his heart. Perhaps one will only learn to cherish things after they have lost them. When the crimson receded and the sky turned golden yellow from the flaming ball's illumination, Klein had made his choice. He got out of bed and headed to the public bathroom to wash his face to wake himself up. Then, he took a one-solely note to Mrs. Wendy's to buy 8 pounds of rye bread with 9 pence, replenishing the staple food that had been consumed the previous night. The price of bread has begun stabilizing, he commented after breakfast as Benson changed. It was Sunday, so both he and Melissa finally had the chance to rest. Klein, who was already in proper attire, was sitting on a chair and flipping through the outdated newspapers he brought back from yesterday. He said in surprise, "There's a house for rent here, North Burrows 3 Wendell Street, a bungalow with 2 floors. There are 6 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, and 2 big balconies upstairs. Downstairs, there's a dining hall, a living room, a kitchen, 2 bathrooms, and 2 guest rooms, as well as an underground cellar. In front of the house are 2 acres of private land and there's a small garden behind. It can be rented for 1, 2, or 3 years, with a weekly rent of £1.6 solely. Those interested can head to Champagne Street and look for Mr. Gusev. That's our goal for the future." Benson wore his black halved top hat as he smiled to say, "The rent for the places in newspapers is usually a little too expensive. The Tingen City Housing Improvement Company has options that do not pale in comparison to that for cheaper. Why are we not searching in the Tingen Housing Improvement Association for the working class?" Melissa walked out from her room holding an old, veiled hat. She had changed into a grayish-white long dress that had been mended several times. She was silent and introverted, but that could not mask her youthfulness. Benson laughed. "Where did you hear of the Tingen Housing Improvement Association for the working class? Jenny? Mrs. Rochelle? Or is it from your good friend Selina?" Melissa looked to the side and whispered a reply. "Mrs. Rochelle. While washing up last night, I happened to meet her. She asked me about Klein's interview and I told her roughly what happened. Then, she suggested I find the Tingen Housing Improvement Association for the working class." Benson noticed Klein's puzzled expression and shook his head in amusement. "They are targeted at the poor." "Well, a precise description is that they are a housing association for the lower strata of society. They build and renovate houses that basically have communal bathrooms. They only provide 3 choices, a single, double or triple bedroom. Do you wish to continue living in such an environment? The Tingen City Housing Improvement Company share similar businesses as them, but they also provide choices for the lower middle class. To be honest, we are a little better than lower middle class, but we still quite worse off than true middle class families. It's not a matter of salary, it's just that we did not have the time to save up." Klein came to a realization as he put away the newspaper. Picking up his top hat, he stood up. "Then, let's set off. I remember that the Tingen City Housing Improvement Company is on Daffodil Street," Benson said as he opened the door. "They are like the Tingen Housing Improvement Association for the working class, known as 5% charities." "Do you know why?" "I don't know." Klein raised his cane and walked to Melissa's side. The girl with black hair that reached down her back nodded. Benson headed out and said, "These kinds of housing improvement associations or companies were established as a result of Backland. They are funded in 3 ways. 1. By requesting donations from charitable foundations. 2. Through funding proposals. They receive grants from the government's commission at a special rate of 4%. 3rd, through investments. By taking a portion of the rent received, they will give their investors 5% returns. That's why they are called 5% charities." The siblings went down the stairs and slowly walked toward Daffodil Street. They decided to confirm a place before talking to their present landlord, Mr. Frankie. They did not want to be in a situation where they were forced to move when had no place to stay. "I heard from Selena that there are housing improvement companies that are purely run as charities?" Melissa asked in thought. Benson chuckled. "There are, such as the Deweyville Trust, which Sir Deweyville donated money to establish. He builds apartments targeted for the working class. He also provides dedicated estate management personnel while only charging rather low rent. However, the criteria for applying is very strict." "It sounds like you aren't fond of the idea?" Klein acutely sensed it as he asked with a smile. "No, I respect Sir Deweyville a lot, but I'm certain he does not know what true poverty is. Staying in his apartment is like a priest giving hope. It's not very pragmatic. For instance, tenants have to receive the main vaccines and they have to take turns cleaning the bathroom. They are unable to sublease their apartments or use it for commercial activities. They aren't allowed to throw their rubbish wantonly and children are prevented from playing in the corridors." "Goddess, does he wish to make everyone ladies and gentlemen?" Benson answered in his usual tone. Klein creased his brows in doubt. "Doesn't sound problematic. Those are all very reasonable criteria." "Yeah." Melissa nodded in agreement. Benson cocked his head and looked at them before chuckling. "Perhaps I have protected the both of you too well that you have not seen actual poverty. Do you think they would have the money for the main vaccines? The line for free charitable organization sets them back 3 months. Do you think their work is stable and not temporary? If they cannot sublet parts of their apartment to receive some extra income, are they to move out when they lose their jobs? Besides, many ladies mend clothes or make matchboxes at home to maintain their livelihood. Those are included as commercial activities. Are you going to chase them all out? Most of the poor use all their efforts to survive. Do you think they have the time to discipline their children and stop them from running along the corridors? Perhaps they can only be locked at home until they're old enough, then sending them to places that accept child labor when they are around 7 or 8 years old." Ben did not use many adjectives to describe the matter. It caused Klein to shudder a little. This was how people from low socioeconomic classes lived. Beside him, Melissa fell into silence. It took a long while before she said in an ethereal tone, "Jenny no longer wished for me to visit her after she moved to the lower street. Let's hope her father gets back on his feet after that injury and finds a stable job. However, I have seen too many alcoholics use alcohol to numb themselves." Benson laughed with a somber tone. Klein was at a loss for words. Melissa seemed to be the same. As such, the siblings walked silently down Daffodil Street and found Tingen City Housing Improvement Company. The person who served them was a middle-aged man with an amiable smile. He did not wear a formal attire or a hat, but instead, wore a white shirt and black vest. "You can call me Scarter. Might I know what kind of house you have in mind?" When he caught a glance at Klein's silver-inlaid cane, his smile widened. Klein looked at Benson, who was better with words, and gestured for him to answer. Benson directly answered, "A terrace house." Scarter flipped through the files and documents in his hand before smiling. "There are currently 5 that haven't been rented out. To be honest, we are geared more to serving customers, laborers and their children who have housing difficulties where 6, 8, or even 10 or 12 people squeeze into a house. There aren't many terrace houses. There's one at 2 Daffodil Street, one in the North Borough, one in the East Borough. The weekly rent goes from 12 to 16 solely. You can take a look at the detailed introductions here." He handed over a document to Benson, Klein, and Melissa. After reading through it, the siblings exchanged looks and pointed to the same spot on the piece of paper simultaneously. "Let's take a look at 2 Daffodil Street first," said Benson. Klein and Melissa nodded in response. This place was a district they were familiar with. 2, 4, and 6 Daffodil Street were terrace buildings with multifaceted hipped roofs. Their exteriors were painted grayish-blue, and 3 chimneys stood erected. The place obviously did not have lawns, gardens, or porches. The entrances directly faced the street. Tingen City Housing Improvement Company's Scarter took out a bunch of keys and while opening the door, introduced, "Our terrace houses do not have foyers, so you enter directly into the living room. There's an oriel window facing Daffodil Street, so there's pretty good lighting." Klein, Benson, and Melissa were greeted by a fabric sofa bathing in the golden rays of the sun, and an area more spacious than their previous two-bedroom apartment. This living room can be used as a guest hall. To its right is the dining room and on the left is a fireplace that will keep you warm in winter. Scarter pointed around with great familiarity. Klein looked around and confirmed that it was a crude, open-style concept. The dining room and the living room were not separated by any partitions, but they were also far from the oriel window, making those spots rather dim. There was a rectangular red wooden table surrounded by 6 hardwood chairs with soft cushions. The fireplace on the left wall looked exactly like the ones in foreign movies and TV series that Klein used to watch. Behind the dining area is the kitchen, but we do not provide any appliances. Opposite to the living room is a small guest room and a bathroom. Scarter walked around and described the remaining layout of the house. The bathroom was separated into 2 parts. The outer area was where one would wash their face and brush their teeth, while the inner area was the toilet. There was an accordion door that separated them. The guest room was described to be small, but it was as big as the room that Melissa currently stayed in. She was stunned at the sight. After looking around the first floor, Scarter brought the 3 siblings to the stairway next to the bathroom. Down below is the underground cellar. It is quite stuffy downstairs, so you must remember to let some fresh air in first before entering. Benson nodded casually and followed Scarter to the second floor. On my left, there's a bathroom. On the same side, there are an additional 2 bedrooms. It's the same layout on my right, but the washroom on this side is next to the balcony. As he spoke, Scarter opened the bathroom door and stood sideways so that he would not obstruct Klein, Benson, and Melissa from looking in. The bathroom had an extra bathtub. Like the other bathroom, there was an accordion door next to the toilet. Although it was a little dusty, it wasn't dirty, smelly, or cramped. Melissa looked in a daze until Scarter walked to the bedroom next to it. Only then did she stop looking and follow the rest slowly. She took another few steps before looking back. Klein, who was experienced in life, was delighted and excited as well. Even though their landlord often supervised their cleaning up of the bathroom, it still was not clean enough. It was often nauseating, let alone the fact that they would easily encounter a line when they needed to relieve their urgencies. The other bathroom was similar. One of the 4 bedrooms was slightly bigger and was furnished with a bookcase. The rest were about the same size as each other and had a bed, table, and wardrobe. The balcony is very tiny, so you won't be able to dry too many clothes in the sun at a time. Scarter stood at the end of the corridor and pointed to a spot with a door and lock. There is a complete underground drainage, gas piping, meter, and other facilities. It is very suitable for you gentlemen and a lady like yourselves. It only requires 13 soldi of rent and 5 pence for use of the furniture weekly. In addition, there is a deposit that amounts to 4 weeks of rent. Without waiting for Benson to say a word, Klein looked around and asked curiously, roughly how much would it cost to buy the house? As a transmigrator from the Foodaholic Empire, the desire to buy property still existed within him. Upon hearing that question, Benson and Melissa were shocked. They looked at Klein as though they were seeing a monster. Scarter replied calmly and firmly, "Buy? No, we do not sell property. We only provide rental properties. I'm just trying to have a general sense of the prices." Klein explained awkwardly. Scarter hesitated for a few seconds before saying, "Last month, the owner of 11 Daffodil Street sold a limited-period land deed with a similar property sitting atop the land. £300 for 15 years. It is much cheaper than renting directly, but not everyone can fork out such a large sum of money. If one would like to buy it over completely, the owner's posted price £850. £850? Klein quickly made the mental calculations. My weekly pay is £3, Benson earns £1 and 10 soldi. Rent is 13 soldi, and if we eat well every day, we would spend nearly £2 a week. On top of that, there are expenses such as clothes, transportation, social expenditures, so on and so forth. We can only save less than 20 soldi a week. 1 year adds up to about £35. £850 would require more than 20 years. Even if we bought the land for a limited period of time for £300, it would take us at least 8 or 9 years. That doesn't include getting married, living independently, raising children, traveling, and so on. In a world without individual housing loans, most people are likely to opt for rental. Realizing this, he stepped back and stole a glance at Benson. He beckoned him to talk to Scarter about the rent. As for Melissa's intentions, they were obvious from her bright eyes. At that moment, Klein suddenly thought of letting Benson loose. Benson tapped his plain cane and looked around before he said, "We should take a look at other houses. The dining area's lighting isn't good, and the balcony is very small. Look, only that bedroom has a fireplace, and the furniture is too old. If we move in, we have to at least change half of these." He pointed out faults in a hurried tone, spending 10 minutes to persuade Scarter to lower the rent to 12 soldi and the furniture usage fee to 3 pence, while rounding up the deposit to £2. Without further ado, the siblings returned with Scarter to the Tingen City Housing Improvement Company and signed 2 copies of the contract. They then headed over to the notary office of Tingen City to notarize the contract. After paying the deposit and first week's rent, Klein and Benson's remaining money added up to £9, 2 soldi, and 8 pence. Standing before the door of 2 Daffodil Street, they each held a bunch of copper keys. They were momentarily unable to look away, their emotions churning within them. It feels like a dream. After a while, Melissa lifted her head to look at the future Moretti residence, and she spoke with a low yet unsteady voice. Benson let out a breath and smiled. "Then don't wake up." Klein wasn't as emotional as they were. He nodded and said, "We need to change the locks of the main door and balcony door as soon as possible. There's no hurry. The reputation of Tingen City Housing Improvement Company is very good. The rest of the money is for your formal suit. However, before that, we need to pay Mr. Frankie a visit." Benson pointed in the direction of the apartment. Ellipsis. The siblings made do with rye bread at home before heading for a terrace apartment on Iron Cross Street. When they knocked on their landlord's door, Mr. Frankie declared imposingly while his short frame perched on a sofa, "You know my rules. No one is allowed to be behind their rent." Benson leaned forward and smiled. "Mr. Frankie, we are here to give up our lease. That straightforward? Would negotiating this way work?" Standing beside Benson, Klein was shocked when he heard him. On the way here, Benson had said that his bottom line was a compensation of 12 soldi. "Give up your lease? No. We have a contract, and there's still half a year left." Frankie glared at Benson as he flailed his arms. Benson looked at him seriously and waited for a moment before saying calmly, "Mr. Frankie, you should understand that you could have made much more money." "Make much more?" Frankie asked with interest, touching his skinny face. Benson sat up straight and explained with a smile, "The 2-bedroom unit was rented to the 3 of us for 5 soldi and 6 pence. But if you were to rent it to a family of 5 or 6 people, with 2 or 3 of them working and getting paid, I think they would be willing to pay more to stay there instead of staying at Lower Street where it's ridden with crime. I think 5 soldi 10 pence or 6 soldi would be a reasonable price." Frankie's eyes brightened up and his throat moved as Benson continued to say, "Besides, you are certainly aware that rental prices have been increasing in recent years. The longer we stay, the greater a loss you incur. But, I need time to look for a new tenant." Mr. Frankie, who had inherited the apartment building, obviously liked the idea. "I believe you can find one very quickly since you have the ability and resources to do so. Maybe 2 days, maybe 3 days. We will pay for the losses you incur during this time. How about the deposit of 3 soldi that we have paid? It is very reasonable." Benson immediately decided for Frankie. Frankie nodded in satisfaction. "Benson, you are such a conscientious and honest young man. All right then, let's sign the termination of contract." Klein was dumbfounded watching this happen. He completely understood how easy it was to convince Mr. Frankie. That's way too easy. With the problem of the previous contract resolved, the 3 siblings first helped Klein buy his formal wear and then got busy with moving house. They didn't have anything heavy or bulky as bulkier items belonged to the landlord. Thus, Benson and Melissa rejected Klein's idea of hiring a carriage, and instead carried their things themselves. They went back and forth between Daffodil Street and Iron Cross Street. The hot sun outside the window set in the west, and golden rays shone through the oriel window, scattering across the desk surface. Klein looked at the rack that had books and notebooks arranged neatly before putting an ink bottle and a fountain pen on the table which he had cleaned earlier. "It's finally over." He let out a breath of relief and heard his stomach growl. He loosened his rolled-up sleeves as he walked towards the door. He had a bed that belonged to him. The bedsheet and blanket were white, old but clean. Klein twisted the doorknob and walked out of his bedroom. Just as he was preparing to say something, he saw both doors on the opposite side open simultaneously as Benson and Melissa came into his view. Looking at the dust and dirt marks on their faces, Klein and Benson suddenly burst out into laughter, sounding abnormally cheerful. Melissa bit her lips lightly, but the laughter was contagious. She eventually let out a soft laugh. Ellipsis. The next morning, Klein stood before a full-length mirror with no cracks, seriously smoothing out his collar and sleeves of his shirt. The outfit included a white shirt, black tuxedo, silk top hat, black vest, a set of trousers, boots, and a bow tie. He felt the pinch of paying £8 in total. However, the effect was great. Klein felt that his reflection in the mirror exhibited greater scholarly qualities and made him look more handsome. Click. He closed his pocket watch and put it into his inner pocket. He then took his cane and hid his revolver. He took the tracked public carriage and arrived at Zoutland Street. The moment he entered the Blackthorn Security Company, he realized that he was so used to his previous lifestyle that he had forgotten to give Melissa extra money but allowed her to walk to school instead. Shaking his head, he took note of it before stepping into Blackthorn Security Company. He saw the brown-haired girl, Roseanne, making coffee. A rich aroma permeated throughout the office. "Good morning, Klein. The weather is great today," Roseanne greeted him with a smile. "To be frank, I have always been curious. In such weather, don't you men feel hot wearing those formal suits? I know for a fact that Tingen's summer isn't as hot as the South's, but it is still summer." "It's the price of style," Klein replied humorously. "Good morning, Miss Roseanne. Where's the captain?" "Same old place." Roseanne pointed inside. Klein nodded. He went through the partition and knocked on Dunn Smith's office door. "Come in." Dunn's voice was deep and gentle as usual. When he saw Klein, who looked quite different in a set of nice formal wear, he nodded and his gray eyes smiled. "Have you decided?" he asked. Klein took a deep breath and answered seriously, "Yes, I have made a decision." Dunn slowly sat up straight. His expression became solemn but the deep recesses of his gray eyes remained the same. "Tell me your answer." Klein replied without hesitation, "Seer." Dunn Smith stared at Klein with his gray eyes for a full minute without a word. Klein did not cower under the pressure of the silence and his gaze. He continued locking his eyes with Dunn. "You must understand that once you consume the potion, there will be no room for regret." Finally, Dunn spoke again in a deep emotionless voice. Klein grinned and said, "I know, but I respect the voice in me. First, Sleepless does not meet my requirements." It was the same for Spectator, which he heard from the Tarot Club based on description. He was unsure when he would come into contact with other Beyonder pathways. A slow remedy could not work for an urgent situation, therefore, there was no need for him to wait. By the same logic, Corpse Collector was eliminated as well, leaving the two choices, Mystery Prior and Seer. Under the premise that potions of the same sequence were equally dangerous and him unable to obtain more information, as well as the fact that both Mystery Prior and Seer met his requirements, then regardless of whether Emperor Roussel was making a passing remark or if he really regretted not choosing Apprentice, Marauder, and Seer, it was enough to tip the balance in his heart. Furthermore, he could tell from the diary that as long as he figured out the true essence of digestion and acting, he would be able to avoid the negative effects the potion would bring to a significant extent. As for the murmurings and illusory enticements that could drive people to corruption and madness, he had already encountered that even without being a Beyonder. "All right." Dunn stood up and picked up his halved top hat. As he put it on, he said, "Follow me down." Klein nodded and gave a gentleman's bow in gratitude. Tap, tap, tap. Both of them ventured down, their footsteps echoing through the silent and vast stairwell and passageway. Klein suddenly felt gripped by anxiety as he tried to find a topic of conversation. "Captain, you mentioned that taking the potion would not directly give me the corresponding knowledge on mysticism, that I'll only have the qualifications to learn it. Then, where does the basic knowledge of mysticism come from? Did our predecessors risk their life for it or obtain it via other means? Every time he went underground, he would find the air especially fresh. Clearly, the ventilation was excellent. However, the occasional gust of wind made one shiver." Dunn glanced at him, the darkness in his gray eyes appearing abnormally deep. He answered calmly, "One of them is, as you said, experimentation, summarization, and enhancement. Second, being bestowed by the gods. Third, hey, the dangerous murmurs that others can't hear do not only growl and roar senselessly. At times, they will describe some matters regarding mysticism. But according to what I know, people who truly listen to the murmurs on a long-term basis have gone mad without exception. Or they would fall to corruption and become monsters. Of course, we must thank them. The notebooks they've left behind are precious treasures in the field of mysticism. Human lab rats? The underground passage's cold humidity made Klein shudder suddenly. Then, would my luck enhancement ritual, which turned into social network magic, eventually lead to similar effects due to the crazy and horrible murmurs? At the intersection, Dunn did not proceed toward Channy's gate, nor did he turn to the weapons, materials and archives. Instead, he took Klein to the left and approached St. Selena Cathedral. Midway, he stopped. It was unclear what he touched to open a secret door. This is our Nighthawk team's alchemy room. I will get old Neil to retrieve the seer potion formula and the corresponding materials from inside Channy's gate. Hey, you have pretty good luck. The goddess has blessed you with her favor. We should still have the materials needed for 2 seer potions. If not, you would have to wait a long while. Dunn pointed at the room behind the door. Wait in here. Later, watch old Neil concoct the potion. It's the most basic part of mysticism studies. Oh, do not randomly touch things in there. They are either very dangerous, expensive, or both. With that said, Dunn added like before. Oh right, I forgot something again. You're becoming a Beyander as a result of you having to face danger and the need to find the notebook. The meritorious deed was only a part of it. Therefore, you will not be a member of our team for the time being. You will still be a civilian staff member with a corresponding salary. You will still do what I instructed you to do previously. One additional thing is to learn more about mysticism with old Neil. You can arrange the time with him. Alright. Other than feeling a little disgruntled by the lack of a pay rise, Klein was in full agreement with the rest. According to Dunn, there was still the process of learning and grasping one's newfound powers after consuming the potion. If he were to become a formal member immediately and participate in paranormal missions, his death was certain. Dunn turned around and walked 2 steps towards the intersection when he suddenly turned back. Another thing. I knew it. Klein was already used to the style of his captain. We got something out of the Secret Order's actions, said Dunn with his usual expression. It's unlikely they will provoke you in the near future, but don't be careless. It has to do with them being temporarily unable to confirm whether the Antigonus family's notebook is important to them. From what we discovered, they have preserved some of the ancient customs and we can confirm that they are related to the Solomon Empire and the corrupted nobles of that period. Got it. Thanks, Captain, said Klein as he exhaled. This was also one of the reasons why he did not wish to wait, grasping the chance of becoming a Beyander in such a hurry. As he watched Dunn leave and confirmed that he would not turn his head to say more, Klein slowly walked into the alchemy room. The room had long tables. There were test tubes, pipettes, scales and crucibles. It resembled a chemistry laboratory from his previous life. It was just more Spartan and ancient. Other than that, there was a huge cauldron, a dark wood ladle, a translucent crystal ball, and other items. The dark sacred emblem and other strange emblems were visible everywhere. They gave the room a tint of mystery. Klein looked around with interest, but he was not stupid enough to touch the things. After a while, he heard footsteps. Old Neil carried a tiny silver chest with complicated patterns. He was still wearing his unique classic black robe that seemed anachronistic, matched with a felt hat with a rounded edge of the same color. Lad, I never expected you to choose seer. Old Neil put down the chest and used his somewhat turbid red eyes size up Klein. Your personality is just like mine when I was young. You just don't want to follow the masses. Not bad. Light these few gas lamps and close the door. All right. Klein tried hard not to tremble as he lit each gas lamp in the alchemy room. He made dim light rule over the place once again. Talk, talk, talk. The secret door was closed. He turned back to see the white-haired and deep-wrinkled old Neil using a bunch of strange-tied tree branches to scrub the black cauldron. The concoction of a sequence potion is extremely simple, at least for sequence 7 and below. There's no need for a special flame or any additional ritual, much less an incantation. There's no need for one to participate in it spiritually. All one needs to do is go according to the formula's steps, add the precise amounts, and mix it. That will be all. Old Neil's wrinkles seemed to bloom from his smile. For real? Klein questioned in surprise. This sounds as simple as my luck enhancement ritual. Man, it's quite frightening when you come to think of it. Perhaps it's a gift of the gods. Praise the lady. Old Neil drew a haphazard circle over his chest. Following that, he opened the silver chest and pulled out goatskin parchment that exuded antiquity. The yellowish-brown goatskin unfurled inch by inch, revealing words on it. Klein looked from a distance and realized it was in Hermes, a language he was very familiar with. It was written in ink that resembled blood, seeming to still having its fluidity intact. But other than that, it did not seem extraordinary in any way. Seer. 100 milliliters of pure water, 13 drops of night vanilla liquids, 7 gold mint leaves. Klein silently recited the formula's content, but the rest of it was blocked by old Neil's wrist, preventing him from reading it. Pure water is water that is repeatedly distilled. Thankfully, I made some previously, so there's no need to waste time on it. While old Neil gave the introduction, he took a large sealed glass bottle from the table with great familiarity. He took off the stopper and poured about 100 milliliters of pure water into the cauldron without much thought. Klein did not dare ask, afraid he would affect old Neil's concoction. After all, he was the one drinking the potion. 13 drops of night vanilla juices. This can be extracted and stored as an essential oil ahead of time. Old Neil took out a tiny brown bottle from the silver chest and with a pipette and dripped 13 drops into the cauldron in a relaxed manner. A faint but easing fragrance emanated, making Klein feel an abnormal sense of peace. 7 gold mint leaves. Old Neil picked up a silver-patterned can and removed its lid. With his bare hands, he picked up a few leaves and scattered it into the cauldron. He caught a whiff of a fresh and stimulating scent. 4, 5, 6, 7. Perfect. Old Neil chuckled and looked at the potion formula on the goatskin. 3 drops of poison hemlock. This isn't something you should drink randomly. It can cause your entire body to numb to the point of death. In ancient times, it proved to be the best option for committing suicide. It's not like I'm silly, Klein lampooned. Old Neil changed pipettes and dripped the poison hemlock into the cauldron. The mixture caused a strange smell that freshened one's mind. 9 grams of dragon blood grass powder. Old Neil took his time to reach his hand into the silver chest and pulled out a transparent test tube. There was some deep black powder inside. He used a beaker and a scale to measure 9 grams of powder and poured it into the cauldron. He then stirred the mixture twice with the dark wood ladle. The laid-back process to making the concoction made Klein a little worried. In fact, the materials from before were just supplemental. The exact amount doesn't really affect the final outcome. Should I put a little bit more? Old Neil made a joke. The last 2 is what's crucial. The amount can be slightly lowered, but it cannot be too far from the requirement, or your enhancement can fail. Oh, the quantity cannot be any more, even just by a bit. If so, you will have to be treated for mental problems. It's not impossible to die immediately. Klein immediately tensed up as he saw old Neil pull out a black glass bottle from the silver chest. Lavos squid's blood, 10 milliliters. This kind of squid is considered an extraordinary biological species. It is clearly mutated. It is covered in mystery. Its blood will rapidly break down under sunlight and lose its unique qualities. It has to be stored in opaque material. Old Neil's tone no longer sounded relaxed. He quickly and carefully retrieved 10 milliliters of blood with a test tube. The blood was blue like the sky. From time to time, it produced illusory bubbles as though it was connected to the spiritual world. After pouring the blood inside the test tube, the remaining drops are ignored as a form of precaution, whispered old Neil. The moment the blue blood entered the cauldron and made contact with the liquid from before, it produced bubbling sounds. The surrounding light was dyed with a light blue tinge, making Klein feel a strange sense of distance but also familiarity. It felt like the feeling of being in a mother's womb. It elevated a human soul. The final item. Stellar aqua crystal. 50 grams. Old Neil's voice sounded in Klein's ears, jolting him awake as he looked at the table. In the old gentleman's hand was a piece of extremely pure crystal. Furthermore, the crystal appeared gelatinous, as though it was jelly from Earth. It lacked hardness. Under the blue light's illumination, it reflected bits of light as it seemed to contain a resplendent void of stars within. This is excellent material for the creation of divination crystals. Just a little less in consideration of any mistakes. As old Neil measured, he used a tiny patterned silver blade to extract the crystal. Pure water, night vanilla, gold mint leaves, poison hemlock juice, dragon blood grass, Lavos squid blood, and stellar aqua crystal make up a seer. At that moment, Klein could not help but recall the formula. With everything done, old Neil poured in a few blocks of stellar aqua crystal into the cauldron. Sizzle. Illusory fog instantly spewed forth, turning the alchemy room into a blur. Klein seemed to see a vast array of stars amid the fog and felt like he was being observed by an invisible existence. A few seconds later, the fog dissipated. Old Neil used the dark wood ladle and scooped out some sticky dark blue liquid. It had strange characteristics, gooey and inseparable. Not one bit was left in the black cauldron. The dark blue liquid was poured into an opaque cup before old Neil pointed at it. "It's done, your seer potion!" Exclamation mark. Report chapter. Klein looked at dark blue gelatinous liquid, finding it hard to describe it as either a block or cup of liquid. He swallowed his saliva and said in great difficulty, "Am I to drink it just like that? Is there no need for any other preparations? Like a ritual, an incantation, or a prayer?" Old Neil acknowledged tersely before saying, "Preparation? There is. Get a cup of Intis Ormir grape wine, suck on a desi cigar, then whistle a relaxing tune, and dance a upbeat court dance. You can do a tap dance if you prefer that. Finally, play a round of Gwent cards." When he saw Klein's expression turn dumbfounded, old Neil laughed and summarized what he had just said. "If you feel nervous, you are quite humorous, aren't you?" The corners of Klein's mouth twitched as he resisted the urge to draw his gun. He put his cane down and extended his right hand. As though he held something heavy, he raised the opaque cup. The smell of the potion was faint and seemingly ethereal. "Lad, do not hesitate. The more you hesitate, the more nervous and afraid you will be. That will only affect the absorption that follows," said old Neil with his back facing Klein. It was as though he had said it casually. It was unknown when he arrived by the nearby water basin. He turned on the tap and washed his hands. Klein nodded silently and took a deep breath. Just like he was back when he was a child, he pinched his nose and drank it like medicine. He moved the opaque cup to his mouth and tipped his head, drinking it down with a gulp. A cool and smooth feeling quickly filled his oral cavity. It then flowed through his gullet and into his stomach. The sticky, dark blue liquid seemed to grow out thin and long tentacles, bringing stimulation and coldness to every cell in Klein's body. He could not help but convulse as his vision rapidly went into a blur. All colors seemed to saturate. The reds were redder, the blues were bluer, and the blacks were blacker. The rich colors blended like an impressionist painting. Klein had seen such a scene before. It was back when he was questioned by the spirit medium, Daly. At that moment, his vision became a blur, and although his mind felt light, it was clear. He felt like a castaway floating in the sea. Slowly, his surroundings turned discernible. All the colors returned to their original as a grayish and blurry fog emanated. Around him were bodies he found difficult to describe. There were transparent objects that did not seem to exist. Deep down, there were clean light clusters of different colors. The light seemed to possess life or contain immense knowledge. This is a little similar to what I saw during the luck enhancement ritual. As Klein instinctively looked down, he realized that he was still standing in his original spot, body convulsing. Suddenly, he came to a realization, causing his consciousness to sink abruptly and fuse with him. Boom! The fog quickly dissipated as the colors restored to normal. The bright, clear halo and the inexistent objects instantly vanished. The scene in the alchemy room returned to normal, but Klein felt his head swell. He felt like it was being yanked apart. Whatever he saw had countless afterimages. His ears were overwhelmed by an ethereal murmur. Hornassus? Phlegria? Hornassus? Phlegria? Hornassus? Phlegria? Klein felt a stabbing pain at his forehead as he quickly had thoughts of causing destruction to vent the discomfort in him. He frowned and hurriedly shook his head. "Is your vision abnormal? Are you also hearing things you did not use to hear?" said old Neil, at his side with a concealed smile. "Yes, Mr. Neil, what should I do?" Klein tolerated the intense mania and asked. Old Neil chuckled. "This is the resulting seepage of the potion's energy. You lack the means to control it. All right, do as I say. Think of an object in your mind, something common. Make it simple and easy." Klein quickly focused as he envisaged his own halved top hat woven from black silk. He recalled the feeling when he touched it and its exact shape. Place all your focus on it. Keep repeating that while creating the outlines. Does it feel a little better? Old Neil's voice penetrated into his mind like a serene song. Klein turned his focus bit by bit to the imagined top hat. He felt the murmur subside into a whisper before they vanished. The afterimages he saw also stacked upon one another and no longer appeared a blur. "Much better," said Klein after calming his mind of chaotic emotions and having exhaled. He looked down at his body and discovered that nothing abnormal had happened. He moved his limbs and with half anticipation and half doubt, asking, "I succeeded? I'm now considered a seer?" Old Neil pulled out a mirror-like mercury plate and shoved it in front of him. "Look at your eyes." Klein focused his gaze and saw that he was wearing a black top hat. His outline stood out and his facial features looked normal. Apart from having his face covered in sweat, he did not seem different in any way. He followed old Neil's instruction and carefully looked at his eyes. Only then did he discover that his brown eyes had deepened quite significantly. It was so much deepened that it was like the night, one in complete darkness. It felt so deep that it could absorb the souls of others. Normally, dark brown pupils are easily recognized as black. Without looking very carefully, even Klein himself would not have noticed. This is a physical manifestation of the potion's powers. When you learn cogitation and how to converge your power, your eyes will return to normal. Old Neil smiled as he reached out his right hand. Congratulations, our new Beyander, our seer. Thank you. Klein reached out his hand and shook it. Mr. Neil, when can I learn how to cogitate? You can learn it now. The initial steps of cogitation is relatively simple. It's even more so for Beyonders, said old Neil with a smile. Just now, producing an object in your mind to divert your attention and turning the energy seepage inwards is actually the first step to cogitation. Try doing it again. Klein closed his eyes and once again, his mind depicted the halved top hat. His concentration seemed to be more easily focused than before. Soon, random thoughts that surfaced would quickly vanish, leaving the hat's outline. Let your brain go somewhat blank. Exchange the object you imagine. Use something that does not exist in this world, an object you imagine completely out of thin air. You have to follow this rule. Only by doing so can you enter cogitation, only then can you exceed the concept of I. The limitless I will become one with the universe, giving you the ability to see and understand the truth. You will obtain knowledge only you yourself can understand. In the domain of mysticism studies, it's called a mystic experience, said old Neil using a pacifying tone. You just need to listen to the descriptions that I'll get to later. What's most important is to enter cogitation. Something that doesn't exist in this world. Imagine something completely out of thin air. Would things from Earth count? Klein attempted using an earthy green intercontinental missile he saw on television. He replaced the halved top hat with this long and thick missile. However, regardless of how he outlined it or imagined it, he ultimately only ended up focusing his attention. It doesn't seem like it will work. Klein had no choice but to let his imagination run wild. He outlined a sphere of light and then many similar objects, gathering them together. The spheres of light stacked upon one another. It felt like an object of fantasy. Klein's thoughts gradually turned ethereal and afloat. His body and mind calmed down. The objects that did not seem to exist, the fog with the bright clusters of light, and the complex colors appeared once again. They floated in the sky in close reach. He extended his spirituality inch by inch as he looked down at them quietly. He sensed it and took it in. Very good. As expected of a seer. You entered cogitation very smoothly. You are just slightly worse than me back then. Slightly, said old Neil with a chuckle. In that case, I'll begin teaching you the most common, easiest to grasp, and most useful ability in the future in mysticism. Spirit vision. He switched off the gas lamps one after another but opened the door to the alchemy room. It made the spot where Klein was dark, but not to the point of failing to make out silhouettes of objects. All right, in your present state, raise your hands and place them in front of your eyes. Your index fingers need to face each other, but they are not to touch. Open your eyes and keep them open until you are accustomed to the darkness. Klein completed each step according to old Neil's description. He saw the silhouettes of his fingers and the surrounding objects. Actually, you should be lying down to let your body be entirely relaxed. But since the effect of your cogitation is not bad, let's continue. Old Neil laughed. Focus your gaze on a spot behind your hands. It has to be behind. Then, slowly move your fingers and maintain the same pose without touching them. Also, do not pull them out of your sight. Klein calmly listened to it and cast his gaze at an empty spot behind his palms. He then slowly moved his index fingers within his vision. Once, twice, thrice. Suddenly, Klein saw a fiery red color in between his fingers. He let out a sound. You see color? That's right. That's the initial step to spirit vision. The color you see is your aura, said old Neil with a chuckle. No rush. Do it a few more times. After stabilizing it, look elsewhere. I'll also take this opportunity to explain to you the different meanings of the different colors. All right. Klein moved his fingers back and forth while having his vision trained on the fiery red. Old Neil thought for a moment before saying, to put it simply, the mainstream way of mysticism is to split non-physical parts of a human into 4 levels. At its core is the spirit body, which is also everyone's basic spirituality. There is a school of thought that believes all biological creatures have spirituality and have a spirit body. I'm not sure about anything else, but to mystery priors, the goal of cogitation and the method to increase our strength is directed toward the spirit body. Outside the spirit body is the astral projection. It is the means for the spirit body to communicate with the spirit world and with stellar space. It's considered an external manifestation of the spirit body. Besides, it will be directly related to your personal ambition and your prevailing emotions. The scenes you see after consuming the potion are scenes your astral projection sees when it wanders through the spirit world. That world does not obey the laws of the physical world. It involves exceeding the concept of I, the limitless I, and the universe's I. The past, present, and future might be stacked upon one another, and that is the source of divination. In the spirit world, what you see is just an imagery, a symbol. You have to interpret it to understand its actual meaning. Divination and many magic spells are cast through the astral projection. Do not mistake its relationship and differences with a spirit body. One is just a body and the other is for form. Klein continued looking at the aura in between his fingertips and made the simple conclusion. Further out will be the body of heart and mind. From this point forth, it will combine with the physical body. It involves your brain and is an overall manifestation of your inferential abilities, your analytical abilities, your observational abilities, and identification abilities. Some potions will mainly raise this. Quite a number of magic spells target it as well. Old Neil explained in relatively great detail. The outermost layer is the ether body. It is a manifestation of your vital energies and physical form. The aura color you see is an external phenomenon of your ether body. In other words, apart from the spiritual bodies, ghosts, and specters you can see directly with spirit vision, it might also include certain existences that should not be seen. You can also see the ether bodies of others or their auras. From their thickness, brightness, and color, you can determine their health and emotional state. When your spirit vision improves and you grasp more mysticism knowledge, you will be able to discover even more details. You can even determine the lifespan of others. By the way, the emotional state I mentioned would also manifest itself because of your astral projection. When you go higher in sequence, your spirit vision will reach a relatively high stage. You can even be able to see someone else's astral projection. That way, you will learn even more things. This is a level only seers and mystery priors can attain. Some fellows even claim that the strongest form of spirit vision allows one to see anything in any place, including the past and future. However, I'm skeptical about it. It sounds quite powerful. Klein was almost turning eager. Old Neil coughed and continued, let's return to the ether body and the colors of the auras. Your limbs and parts that are required in motion will appear red. Your head and brain surface will appear as purple. Spots that excrete waste will appear orange. The digestion system will appear as yellow. The heart and other regulatory systems will appear green. Your throat and other parts of the nervous system will appear blue. An entirely balanced body will make a body be cloaked in white. That is a symbol of health. Once it turns dark or the thickness thins, the color will change. That indicates that the corresponding spot has turned problematic. It means it's in a state of exhaustion or illness. In addition, the inner layer of the astral projection represents prevailing emotions. Red means passion and excitement. Orange means warmth and satisfaction. Yellow means happiness and extroversion. Green means calm and peace. Blue means coldness and stillness that one is in thought. White means brightness, and eagerness to improve. Dark colors mean worry, sorrow, and silence. Purple means that spirituality is taking control of the lead, coldness and estrangement. Klein silently memorized the information and stabilized his initial spirit vision. Good, you can look at other objects. Old Neil did not speak further as he nodded. Klein slowly turned his head and looked at Old Neil. Indeed, he saw different colors in different parts of his body. The aura was both thick and thin at different spots. The purple color at his head was brightest and his limbs' redness was relatively dark. The overall whiteness to his body was somewhat faded as well. Indeed, he's getting on in age. Klein made a silent comment to himself. Only with what he saw did he feel that he had become a Beyander. I am now a Beyander. He shifted his gaze and carefully sized up Old Neil when suddenly he saw a translucent pair of cold and ruthless eyes without any brows in the void behind him. This nearly illusory eyes were staring at Old Neil intently, as well as him. This, Klein shuddered as he gaped and said, you have a pair of eyes behind you. Old Neil was taken aback before he forced a smile. Ignore them. The moment Old Neil finished his sentence, the illusory pair of eyes that lurked in the darkness behind him vanished. Even in his spirit vision state, Klein was no longer able to identify traces of its existence. This is a characteristic of ritualistic magic, explained old Neil with a chuckle. Fascinating. Is spirit vision an enhanced version of yin-yang eyes? Klein felt like a child who had received a new toy. In excitement, he turned his gazeway and began observing every corner of the room. He wanted to see the differences of the alchemy room with and without the spirit vision. The outlines of the objects in the dark, such as the tables, test tubes, scales, cups, and cupboards, did not look different from how it looked like without spirit vision. They did not emit any lights or colors. Objects without lives do not have any spirituality? Klein mumbled to himself as he swept his gaze toward the silver chest. Suddenly, he saw a vibrancy of colors. The colors were as blue as the sky, as resplendent as the stars, or as crimson red as burning flames. Materials from extraordinary beings still have some life in them, and are still active? Even if the source is already dead? Klein deliberated on his words as he sought old Neil's help. A precise description is that they have remnant spiritualities. It is one of the crucial points of a successful potion concoction. It is also one of the reasons why a Beyander will lose control. Dunn should have already informed you, explained old Neil frankly. He suddenly laughed, having recalled something. I remember that the formula of Corpse Collector requires a desiccated mature black-spotted frog. To consume that potion requires a lot of courage. Klein imagined a little and found it disgusting. He did not echo old Neil's words and turned his gaze to a dark area. However, there were no spiritual bodies or ghosts that he looked forward to seeing. Isn't it said that the world of spirits is everywhere? He asked out of curiosity. Old Neil chuckled tersely before saying, Punk, repeat after me. This is the headquarters of a Nighthawk squad. This is the ground beneath the church of the Evernight goddess. There are many Beyonders in here. Do you think we will allow spirits and souls to wander around in here? Furthermore, the spiritual world and spirit are two different concepts. Klein felt a little embarrassed as he turned his head, pretending to look at the faint light from the gas lamps at the entrance. I get it. While speaking, the area between his brows began to spasm. What's happening? Just as Klein turned around to ask, he suddenly saw a figure standing quietly by the door at the periphery of the light. It appeared human, though its aura's colors and the darkness blended perfectly, making it impossible to discern. Hiss. Klein felt a painful spasm at his glabella less than sup greater than 1 less than sup greater than. His vision turned chaotic as he focused his attention again, but there was no formless figure. Strange. He turned around and asked. Mr. Neil, the spot in between my brows is a little painful from spasms. Haha, this is very common. You are a new Beyander. Spirit vision places a great burden on your spirit body. Furthermore, it drains you constantly. Physical effects can be glabella spasms, headaches, oversensitivity, and minor bouts of hallucinations. And while viewing things with spirit vision, it's very easy to feel uncomfortable as a result of the unfamiliar surroundings. It's also very easy to have your emotions affected by others. These are things that require you to pay attention. You can become accustomed to and eliminate them with repeated practice. In addition, use it sparingly and end it in a timely fashion, answered old Neil with a smile. Why does it feel like you are delighted by this? Klein hurriedly asked for advice. Then, how do I exit from the state of having spirit vision? He had planned on mentioning the invisible figure he had seen, though when he heard of the minor bouts of hallucination among the symptoms, he struck that thought away. From the glabella spasm and headache, he could completely guess old Neil's answer. Like before, think of an item to divert your attention. It will bring you out of cogitation. Close your eyes and control your spirituality and repeatedly tell it to end. When you open your eyes again, you will discover that your spirit vision has ended. Old Neil described leisurely, and when he was done, added, of course, that is the most trivial and clumsy method. We can repeatedly hint to ourselves in cogitation from practice to affect our spirituality. That way, you will have a simple switch. For instance, tapping at your glabella twice lightly would allow you easily activate spirit vision. Another 2 taps will simply end it. As for how you set it up, it depends on your habits and preferences. Got it. Klein thought for a moment and planned to imitate old Neil to use tapping his glabella twice as a switch for his spirit vision. Tapping once was easily mistaken as an instinctive knock to his head, and tapping thrice could be a waste of valuable time in dangerous situations. As for actions like snapping fingers, they were too attention-drawing. He eased his focus and imagined the stacked spheres of light and re-entered a state of cogitation. Under Old Neil's guidance, after repeated hints and practice, he finally set up his switch. He clenched his fists slightly and used his index finger's joint to tap at his glabella twice. Immediately, there were glowing auras of differing thickness and colors appearing before his eyes. After another 2 taps, everything returned to normal. "I've finally grasped it," he sighed with delight. Only then did he realize how exhausted he was, feeling like he could fall asleep at any time. His mind hurt as though he had stayed up for 3 nights. Old Neil said with a chuckle, "We are not sleepless. Every practice and every time spirit vision is used excessively, you will need some sleep. You can now go back and have a good rest. In the afternoon, go to Iron Cross Street where Welch's place is and walk around. Try your best to find clues about the Antigonus family's notebook as soon as possible. Tomorrow, I'll continue teaching you about mysticism. Of course, do not forget to read the historical documents." All right. Klein was in full agreement with Old Neil's arrangements. He picked up his cane and left the alchemy room. He watched the door close as Old Neil returned to the armory. Klein massaged his glabella and temples and with the help of his cane, sauntered up the stairwell. At that moment, Dunn Smith came from behind him with the corners of his lips hooked. With a deep gaze, he said, "I heard from Old Neil that you are a very suitable candidate. Even without cogitation, you were able to use spirit vision. Perhaps it's a unique trait of being a seer," replied Klein humbly. He guessed that Dunn had been watching the armory for Old Neil. Dunn slowed down and went ahead of Klein a little. After a few seconds of silence, he turned around and said, "You have to remember that curiosity killed the cat. It can also kill beyonders. Do not attempt to probe the murmurings you should not be listening or see existences you should not see." All right. Klein knew this was another reminder of how beyonders lost control. After entering Blackthorn Security Company, he greeted Roseanne, who obviously did not know that he had become a Beyander. He slowly walked out the door and reached the streets where he took a trackless carriage to Daffodil Street. He nearly fell asleep on his return journey. It was still in the morning and the temperature was about 26 degrees Celsius. Klein pulled out a copper key from his waistband and opened the door to his home. There were still many items missing from his home. The living room and dining hall were still empty. Benson and Melissa had work or school, so they had both left early in the morning. Klein did not have the capacity to bother with anything else. He closed the door and briskly went to the second floor and entered the bookshelf-equipped bedroom that belonged to him. After taking off his tuxedo and hanging it on a clothing rack, he eagerly plunged into bed. The moment his head hit the pillow, he fell asleep. Klein was awoken by bright sunlight. He turned his head and slowly opened his eyes to discover the burning sun outside. What time is it? Did I miss the tarot club in the afternoon? He struggled to get up and walked to the clothing rack to take out his pocket watch from the pocket of the tuxedo's inner lining. Not only had he forgotten about the matter, he had forgotten to close the door to his bedroom and pulled the curtains to the oriel window. Pa! Klein pulled out the pocket watch and immediately felt relieved when he opened it. It was only slightly past noon. There was still a lot of time until the scheduled gathering at 3 in the afternoon. It was Monday, the day he would have a gathering with the Hanged Man and Justice. Klein went into thought as he tapped his glabella twice. The scene before him changed once again as he saw that his body had restored to a bright luster. He tapped twice again and stopped his spirit vision. Relaxed, he went to the first floor and boiled a kettle of water. He placed some inferior quality tea leaves and chewed on some rye bread dabbed in a little butter. Afterwards, Klein flipped through historical materials and original Klein's diary. He began, revising, and consolidating his knowledge. At 2:57 p.m., Klein closed his book and capped his fountain pen before pulling the curtains. Immediately following that, he locked the bedroom's door, making the room turn abnormally dark. He tapped his glabella twice and activated spirit vision to survey his surroundings. After confirming that there were no invisible spiritual bodies in his room, Klein stopped the spirit vision and took out his pocket watch to check the time. Tick-tock, tick-tock. 1 minute before 3, he opened up his pace and like before, walked 4 steps in a counter-clockwise manner in a squarish shape. He incanted in Chinese softly. Only this time, he did not prepare any staple food. Klein closed his eyes as he felt the back of his hands turn itchy. It felt like the 4 black dots forming a square was protruding and projecting something. Hysterical shouts and alluring murmurs began resounding, but Klein realized that the headache was not as bad as the first time. It was not that he was unaffected, but that he was doing his best to stop himself from listening. As a Beyander, he had to have more self-control in such an environment. Soon, his body turned light as he floated up. He saw the grayish-white and blurry fog that emanated. Then, he saw dark red stars. Two of them had a minuscule connection with him with an abnormal sense of familiarity. Klein looked at his blurry self and muttered in confusion, "The astral projection that old Neil mentioned?" He remained calm for a few seconds and again transformed the opulent divine palace with the tall bronze table under the dome ceiling, as well as the 22 high-back chairs that corresponded to the different constellations. Klein calmly walked to the seat of honor and made his body and face be immersed in thicker gray fog. He extended his right hand and tapped two familiar deep red stars and created a miraculous connection. Exclamation mark. Report chapter. In an underground basement without any windows, the burly Alger Wilson sat by a long table with various apparatuses and goatskin parchments on it. In front of him was a half-consumed candle. The dim, yellowish flames flickering made the shadows of the objects and table move like a mirage. Alger's hair was disheveled like seaweed with a deep blue color that resembled black. He wore a robe with lightning patterns embroidered on it. He clasped his hands with his thumbs facing each other while he focused on a bottle of black liquid to the left of the candle. Whoosh, 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 splash, splash, splash. The sound of tempestuous winds or the crashing of the sea waves howled from inside the sealed bottle. And in spots where the black ink did not sink, a faint fog would swirl. It was as though it grew eyes and a mouth. Alger cocked his head to glance at the clock hanging on the wall and watched the needle strike 3. He pressed down on his temple as his eyes turned dark. Fascinating colors surfaced from the various items on the table. At that moment, he discovered a deep red light appear like a tidal wave from nowhere, drowning him instantly. Ellipsis. Backland, Empress Borough, inside the Hall family's luxurious mansion. After dismissing her dance teacher, Audrey locked the door and sat straight up in front of her dressing table. The sun outside was bright and gorgeous. There was a light brown notebook made of exquisite goatskin. It was flipped open to reveal that it was blank. To its right was a fountain pen with a golden tip and embedded rubies. Audrey did a test and made sure that she could pick up the fountain pen and write down the formula the moment she left the gathering. "I'm so looking forward to it." She inhaled to repress her excited emotions as she looked at the mirror with puckered lips. However, she did not see it reflect herself. Instead, a dark red and illusory beam burst out from her body. Above the gray fog stood a majestic divine hall that looked like a giant's residence. Dark red colors bloomed on both sides of the bronze table. They surged upwards like a fountain before pattering down. It carved two blurry figures who sat in the same spots as before. Audrey, with her soft blonde hair and tall, slim build, instinctively looked towards the seat of honor. She saw the figure immersed in thick gray fog sitting back. One hand was flat, touching the table's side while the other hand was stroking his chin. "Good afternoon, Mr. Fool Tilda," Audrey shouted with a cheery voice. Following that, she turned her head and looked at the person opposite her. With the same tone, she said, "Good afternoon, Mr. Hangman Tilda. This lady sure is unsophisticated. Is she so sure that I'm a good person? Why isn't there any fear from her? Is she a noble lady who has been protected well?" Klein smiled and maintained his unfathomable image. "Good afternoon, Miss Justice." As he spoke, he lowered his head slightly and moved his left hand and tapped his glabella twice. What he saw changed instantly. He saw Justice and the Hanged Man emit the colors of their aura. And the surrounding gray fog and dark red stars remained the same. Nothing that seemingly did not exist or lustrous brilliances that possessed life was seen. He shifted his gaze and saw that Justice's aura perfectly matched the colors old Neil described. What was supposed to be red, purple, blue, or white were their respective colors. Furthermore, they maintained a lustrous brilliance and were of appropriate thickness. It was easy to tell that she was a vibrant young girl. The colors of her emotions are red and yellow. That's joy, zeal, and excitement. Klein made a judgment before casting his attention towards the Hanged Man. Like Justice, there was nothing special about the colors of the Hanged Man's aura. His emotions were blue mixed in with some orange. Calm, thoughtful, careful, and a little pleased. With this being his first attempt, Klein made a conclusion without much confidence. Just as he shifted his gaze away, he suddenly realized something strange. The aura of the Hanged Man's innermost layer was nearly of the same color. Klein focused his mind and took another careful look. He could faintly see that deep within the Hanged Man's ether body was a deep blue, akin to the sea. It felt like a tidal storm. His astral projection? Or should I say the surface of his astral projection? From the looks of it, he's really a Beyonder, and one that's apparently stronger than old Neil. Klein analyzed as his mind was filled with questions. Not necessary. It might have to do with this being a unique environment. It's only because this is my home ground that I'm able to see these things that old Neil did not manifest. He turned his head toward Justice again and confirmed that it was a characteristic only Beyonders possessed. At that moment, Alger also completed his greetings. Audrey drew a light gasp as she asked in anticipation, "Mr. Hanged Man, did you receive the box of ghost shark blood?" Alger took a look at Klein and saw him tapping his glabella as though he was considering other matters. "Thank you very much. It perfectly met my expectations. I never expected you to send it to me so quickly. The ghost shark blood is not the typical extraordinary creature," said Alger frankly. Audrey smiled humbly and said, "I'm very happy to see this outcome." As she loved anything to do with mystery from a young age, she had befriended those in aristocratic circles with similar interests. They have exchanged information, books, and rare artifacts among each other. But before this, none of them had ever obtained any supernatural power to become a real Beyonder. Instead, there were a few princes that hinted that they could gift them what they wanted if they became their princess consort. However, she had obtained the ghost shark blood directly from her family's vault. After all, the inventory only states, 1 big bottle, without mentioning how many milliliters or how full it had to be. She believed that pouring a little bit of it would go unnoticed. Even if there was an accident and the matter was exposed, her parents were unlikely to pursue the matter. Alger looked deeply at the fool who was enveloped in fog before turning his head back with a smile. "According to our agreement, I will tell you the formula to the potion, Spectator. Let me prepare myself." "All right, begin." Audrey inhaled as she focused her full attention. "Low-sequence potions are very easy to concoct. Just follow the order that I provide you. Do remember that there can be smaller quantities of the ingredients but not more. It would cause major problems. You should have heard about news of Beyonders losing control. I believe there's no need for me to repeat it." Alger first mentioned things to take note of. Audrey nodded gently and said, "I understand completely." While she spoke, she turned her head to look at Mr. Fool. She wished to know if the mystery expert had anything to add. Unfortunately, the fool was sitting silently there like a statue. Alger thought for a moment before saying, "Having smaller quantities does not mean it should deviate by too much. If you do not have an assistant, I suggest you spend some time familiarizing yourself with chemistry experiment." "I have a family tutor for such matters," answered Audrey without feeling the burden. After Alger mentioned the furthest extent of the deviation, he recited with great fluency, "Spectator. Sequence 9 potion. 80 milliliters of pure water. 5 drops of autumn crocus essence. 13 grams of cowteeth pional powder. 7 petals of elf flowers. A matured manhall fish's eyeball. Add 35 milliliters of goat-horned black fish blood. The final 2 items are the main ingredients. They are extraordinary creatures from the sea. You have to be careful." "All right," Audrey recalled and repeated, 80 milliliters of pure water. 5 drops of autumn crocus essence, 13 grams of cowteeth. Pional powder, reminded Alger. With his help, Audrey gradually and precisely memorized the formula's order. However, she appeared worried as she mumbled it again and again. "Do you know about cogitation?" When Alger saw Justice nod, he continued, "I do not know how much you know about cogitation. Let me describe it once. After consuming the potion, quickly begin cogitation to control your spirituality and energy. Make sure to practice every day to truly grasp the powers of the potion. Dig out the meaning it symbolizes and even more of its mysteries. That way, you can avoid the danger of losing control to the greatest extent. And the meaning of a potion mainly lies in its name, such as Spectator." Klein silently listened to the conversation and had no plans on interrupting. All he did was secretly memorize and study, but when he heard that, he suddenly had a thought. Audrey listened to the hanged man's explanations attentively, and just as she was about to inquire about something more detailed, she suddenly heard the rapping sound on the table. She and Alger turned their heads and looked at the fool. They realized that the mysterious and mighty figure was tapping gently with his fingers. He said in a deep voice, "It's not about grasping them, but rather digesting them. It's not about discovery, but rather acting. The name of a potion is not only symbolic, it's also imagery. It is the key to digesting." Audrey was dazed and confused from hearing that. She was not very clear on what Mr. Fool was trying to express. She subconsciously eyed the hanged man for a reaction from the corner of her eyes. She was surprised to see him jolt and freeze. It was as though an ordinary person had heard a loud and sudden clap of thunder. Digesting, acting, digesting, acting, digesting, acting, key. Alger repeated it again and again softly as though he had grasped a key concept or had succumbed to a strange curse. After a while, he raised his head and said with a hoarse voice, "Thank you, Mr. Fool. Your hint is as valuable as my life. You have enlightened me greatly. Of course, I believe I have yet to fully understand or comprehend it." Klein maintained his mysterious and unfathomable image by saying with a smile, that was an advance payment. In fact, he did not truly understand the exact meaning of what was said. He was just certain that Emperor Roussel was more powerful than the typical Byander and stronger than the Hanged Man. Advance payment. Audrey looked at the Hanged Man's reaction and knew that the hint from before was precious. As she ruminated over it, she asked, "Mr. Fool, what do you wish for us to do?" Opposite to her, Alger said with a nod, "What matter might you wish to entrust us with?" Klein leaned back slightly as he glanced at the two of them before saying in a soft and pleasant voice, "Collect Roussel Gustave's secret diary on my behalf, even if it's just one page of it." Roussel Gustave's secret diary? Emperor Roussel? Indeed, only such matters are worth the concern of a mighty figure like Mr. Fool. Audrey was first taken aback before she realized that she found it nothing surprising. Rumor had it that Emperor Roussel had once seen the blasphemy slate. It was said that the secret cards he created hid the 22 paths of the divine. This was something every high-sequence Byander would definitely pay attention to. Diary? That's a diary? Alger frowned slightly as he keenly noticed this tidbit. The item which Roussel Gustave had left behind had been described by Mr. Fool as a diary. How did he know? How did he determine it? Could he know the way to decipher Roussel's cryptic text? Faced with the Hanged Man's question and having obtained the desired effect, Klein leaned back into his chair and interlocked his hands. He answered in a relaxed manner, "Let us first view it as a diary for now." He did not deny or confirm it. Audrey had heard the children of other nobles mention the matter. However, she had never really learned much of it. With her curiosity piqued, she asked, "It said that Emperor Roussel's, well, diary was written in a cryptic language or symbols he invented." "Yes," answered Alger simply. "Some people believe that it is a unique set of symbols from mysticism. Others believe that it is a hieroglyph. But up to today, no one has found the correct way of deciphering it. At the very least, that's all I know." With that said, he turned his head at Klein in a bid to get some confirmation or show his suspicions. "They are texts that have been passed down for generations, so are no longer in their original state. According to your line of thought, how can it be deciphered?" Klein maintained his calm as he secretly gave a self-deprecating laugh. As for how to handle the symbols of mysticism, he instantly thought of a ridiculous and funny scene. Dressed in a black pointed hat and long robe, an evil mage pulls up his sleeve to reveal a symbol tattooed on his arm. It was said that this was a symbol with mysterious power left behind by Emperor Roussel. They were written in two blue, large simplified Chinese characters, "Retarded Joker." The corners of Klein's mouth curved up slowly as he found himself in a good mood. After hearing the Hanged Man's description, Audrey said in a stumped manner, "We can't understand the symbols or the words. Then, how are we to pass the information to you, Mr. Fool? Or are we to mail it somewhere? This is quite an important question. I do not have the means to accept an item secretly." Klein was in no hurry to answer. He repeatedly released his thumbs from his interlocked hands before tapping them back again. Soon, he thought of a solution. "Since I can create a divine palace and table according to my wishes in here, would it be possible to project the content in the minds of others here? I'll give it a try." At that moment, Audrey and Alger saw Mr. Fool slowly sit up amid the thick grayish fog. "Miss Justice, let us give it a try. Imagine a paragraph of text and give it the emotions of writing it with urgency. Yes, pick up the fountain pen beside you and write on the piece of paper." Before Klein finished his sentence, Audrey saw a piece of yellowish-brown goatskin parchment and a dark red fountain pen in front of her. She picked up the fountain pen both curiously and doubtfully. In accordance with the instructions, she imagined a poem Emperor Roussel once wrote. "If winter comes, can spring be far behind less than sup greater than one less than sup greater than?" After scrutinizing the text, she picked up her fountain pen and imbued them with the desire of projecting them out. Klein sensed the emotions and using the fountain pen as a medium, he guided her. The moment Audrey landed her fountain pen, she saw a line appear on the goatskin parchment. "If winter comes, can spring be far behind?" Goddess, how fascinating! Audrey exclaimed in astonishment while feeling rueful. Following that, she looked at Klein with some fear. Mr. Fool, can you read what I'm thinking? No, I'm only guiding you. I simplified the process of writing for you and made it become an imprint. If you did not wish to express it, nothing would appear. Klein placated her with a low tone. Is that so? Then we can only memorize the symbols or the way the cryptic text looks like. Then, we can present it directly as we wish? Audrey heaved a sigh of relief as she asked in enlightenment. Yes. Klein answered. That's not a bad method. Miss Justice, do not doubt your memory. After becoming a spectator, you will receive immense improvement in this aspect. Alger had watched the attempt from the side, fully coming to the realization that the fool was more powerful and mysterious than he imagined. As for his memory, he believed that the next advancement would improve it sufficiently. Regarding this, Audrey nodded in delight. You have delighted me with this reminder. Mr. Hanged Man, do you have any other guidance on spectators? With that said, she looked toward the seat of honor. Mr. Fool, I will work hard to complete your mission. I will do my best to gather more of Emperor Russel's secret diary. I mentioned before that I'm a person who likes a fair and equal exchange. The advanced payment I gave is only equivalent to 2 pages of the diary for each person. If there are more, I will give additional in return, Klein said calmly, like he was an adult who did not take advantage of children. As for where the additional payment could come from, it was naturally from the newly acquired Emperor Russell diary pages. This formed a virtuous cycle. You are truly a generous gentleman. Alger fell silent for a few seconds before bowing slightly with his hand by his chest. After the bow, he turned to Justice and said, let me emphasize once more. A spectator will forever be a spectator. I know that many spectators enjoy imagining themselves to be the protagonist or some other character. As a result, they invest a lot of feelings into it, to the point of crying, laughing, raging, and turning sorrowful because of the drama. However, that is not what a spectator should do. While faced with the various dramas of society and figures who knowingly or unknowingly act the role of particular characters, you have to maintain the attitude of being an absolute bystander. Only then can you calmly and objectively observe them. You will discover their habits, their tics from lying, or their scent of nervousness. From those minute clues, you can grasp their true thoughts. Believe me, everyone is different because of their emotions. They will secrete different things, and different smells. However, only a real spectator can sniff it out. Once you invest too many of your emotions, your observation will be influenced. Your sensitivity towards the emotions of others will deviate. Audrey listened attentively as her eyes brightened gradually. It sounds, really interesting. Klein's heart stirred when he heard that. The spectator potion's requirement when summarized seemed to be, an absolutely objective and neutral spectator. In a particular sense, it was equivalent to acting. Acting? Was this the acting, which Emperor Russell was referring to? Then, I will have to act as a seer, and from there, digest the potion bit by bit? Just as Klein was immersing himself in thought, Alger finished explaining the demands he knew of a spectator. He sighed before saying, it seems like there's nothing else? Perhaps we can have a casual chat. We can talk about things happening around us. Perhaps it is something very normal to you, but in the ears of others, it might be a very important clue. Sure. Klein snapped back and nodded slightly. He was already planning to attempt to act as a seer. After all, it did not seem like there were any negative effects from doing so. Then, shall we begin with you, Mr. Hanged Man? Audrey agreed in excitement. Alger thought for a moment before saying, the infamous pirate who calls himself Lieutenant General Deweyville has begun his voyage to explore the eastern end of the Sonia Sea again. Oh, the owner of the Black Tulip? Returned Audrey with a question after some thought. Yes, Alger replied with a nod. I don't even know who that is. Klein listened silently while he pondered over the news he planned on sharing. It had to be something that did not expose him while also allowing him to gain feedback. Soon, he decided. He maintained his unfathomable image as the fool and caressed the side of the bronze table with his fingers. According to what I know, the Secret Order has lost an Antigonus family notebook. This news was not only known by the Nighthawks from Tingen City. The Secret Order as well as Beyonders with close ties with them similarly knew. An Antigonus family notebook? Alger repeated before smiling with a shake of his head. I'm really curious as to what reaction the Church of the Evernight Goddess will have if they learn of it. Why would he mention the Church of the Evernight Goddess? Klein acutely sensed a problem, but it was not appropriate for him to ask. That would shatter his image as the mysterious and profound fool. At that moment, Audrey asked out of curiosity, Why are you curious? What sort of special reaction would the goddess's church have? Alger smiled and said, the Antigonus family was destroyed by the Church of the Evernight goddess. I'm not really sure if it happened at the end of the fourth epoch or the early stages of the present epoch. This Klein's pupils constricted as a chill suddenly swept through him. From the looks of it, the value the Nighthawks have placed on this Antigonus notebook far exceeds my imagination. The reason why they nominated me as a Beyander, having some contribution and to prevent danger to me are likely negligible reasons, is that they wish for me to raise my spiritual sensitivity to aid them in finding the notebook. This was not kept from me by Captain. He had mentioned it, but I just didn't pay much attention to it. After hearing the hanged man's explanation, Audrey said with deep interest, I never imagined that such a thing would happen. All right, my turn. Let me think of what I have to share. She cocked her head and held her head up with her hand before chuckling. Yesterday, my etiquette teacher taught me how to faint elegantly without any faux pas. It's a practical skill used at social events to avoid awkward situations or nasty guys. Heh heh, I was just organizing my thoughts. What I really wanted to say is that ever since the failure of the battle on Balaam's eastern shore, the king, premier, and gentlemen are under immense stress. They eagerly wish to change. Exclamation mark. Report chapter. While Audrey recalled the conversation between her father and elder brother about the situation, she put in her own words, they believe that the government structure is too chaotic. Every election, if there is a change of the ruling party, there will be a change of personnel from top to bottom. It makes things a mess and lowers efficiency tremendously. Not only does it cause the battle loss, it also brings great inconvenience to the civilians. Klein knew very well that as there was no example to reference, the Lowen Kingdom had yet to evolve into a system that examined public servants. The political situation was still in its preliminary stages. Therefore, after every election victory, many so-called positions would be awarded to members and supporters. Emperor Russell not establishing such an institution in Intis does not match his personality. Could it be that he diverted his focus to other things later in life? When the hanged man, Alger, heard that, he interjected with a soft chuckle. They believe? Then their beliefs are a little slow. Perhaps they will only feel the itch a year after they get bitten by black mosquitoes. Black mosquitoes were a type of creature that resided in the south of the Lowen Kingdom. It was extremely venomous, and its venom made victims have the urge to rip apart their skin. Audrey extended her palm and covered her mouth. Ignoring the hanged man's mockery, she expressed the core information of what she said. Unfortunately, they are temporarily unable to find a good solution to replace this system. Klein listened carefully and felt that the topic was in the domain of his expertise. He smiled faintly and said, this is a simple problem. The Futaholic Empire and the decadent countries that studied the Futaholic Empire had very advanced experiences of success. Simple? Audrey returned with a question in puzzlement. Although her education did not include politics, she often heard from the discussions of her father, brother, and people around her. She had a sufficient understanding of similar matters. Klein felt as though he had returned to the message boards of yesteryear. Composed, he said, an examination, just like an entrance examination for college. Hold an exam that is open to the public. It can be split into 2 rounds or 3 rounds. Use the most objective method to select the elite. But, Audrey knew what sort of objection this would entail. Before she had the chance to arrange her thoughts, Klein continued, after which, use these elites to fill the positions of the cabinet, the county government, the city government, and the various towns. Yes, the positions that are directly handling matters, such as the secretary of the cabinet. Different positions should be given different requirements. The second or third rounds can be tested based on locale and region. Professional matters should be left to the professionals. As for political positions such as ministers, governors or mayors, they will be left to the parties that win the election. That is a slice of the pie they deserve. Alger, who lacked interest in such matters, unknowingly turned his head and listened carefully. Audrey frowned slightly as she fell into deep thought. There's no hurry in replacing everyone at once. The cabinet and various agencies in the civil service will be crippled if that happens. You can have an examination every year or every 3 years. They can be gradually replaced. Finally, in light of the kingdom's expansion and the salaried civil servants' resignations that will bring in vacancies, you can systematically allot spots. Klein fully expressed his talent as a keyboard politician. He then faced his palm outwards and said, such a design can bring the kingdom's insightful elites into the government. Regardless of the party in power or who the minister is, the civil service will allow the kingdom to maintain its basic and effective operations. Of course, a side effect was the birth of the undying devil that was bureaucracy. While considering the suggestion, Audrey asked doubtfully, "Are you implying that even if those ministers become monkeys, the effects would be insignificant?" "No," Alger interjected suddenly. "I believe that monkeys are a better choice than the present ministers." He paused before adding, "After all, monkeys only need to eat, sleep, and mate. They would not come up with foolish ideas and insist on brainless projects." "Mr. Hanged Man, it sounds you have quite a terrible superior." Klein sat at his seat of honor and shook his head in silent amusement. Audrey ruminated over the suggestion Mr. Fool had offered and after a while, said in surprise, "It sounds like it actually might work. It's a very simple but effective solution." She looked at Klein and sincerely marveled, "Mr. Fool, you must be an elderly person with outstanding intelligence who is very experienced in life." Ellipsis. The corners of Klein's mouth twitched a little as he looked at the Hanged Man and Justice for a few silent seconds. "Let us end today's gathering here. If Miss Justice is able to influence her family and effect change on this matter, I can guide Benson ahead of time and give him a chance at becoming a civil servant." On careful thought, Benson was indeed suitable for such a career. However, it is unlikely Justice would take the initiative to do it. This is because the Hanged Man and I can easily find out which noble suggested it and basically guess her identity. Of course, she could do it through a roundabout manner secretly. "By your will." Audrey and Alger stood up together. Klein leaned back slightly and severed the connection. He saw Justice and the Hanged Man's illusory and blurry figures instantly shatter and dissipate. Above the grey fog, in the opulent palace where gods seemingly lived, he was the only one sitting silently at the head of the bronze table. Klein did not plunge into the grey fog like the other time to leave. This was because his mind was still energetic enough after becoming a Beyander. The reason why he had ended the Tarot Club early was because he learned the true attitude the Nighthawks had towards the Antigonus notebook. He decided that he had to search for it seriously and not sleep all the way. Doing so would make Dunn Smith suspicious of his activities at home. Furthermore, he had benefited quite a lot this time. Klein sat on the high-back chair at the head of the bronze table. His arms leaned on the armrest as he crossed his fingers while he observed the boundless grey fog carefully. He found the place serene as though no one had stepped into it for 10 million years. When he established the connection to summon the Hanged Man and Justice, he acutely noticed something. That was the fact that as a Beyander himself, he had the ability to touch another dark red star. "Does this mean I can summon one more?" Klein recalled the feeling and muttered in confirmation. However, he did not have the urge to make an attempt since he did not know what the identity of the newcomer would be or what sort of attitude they would have. After all, not everyone was like Justice or the Hanged Man, who had unique personalities that easily blended in and took whatever they needed. They even seemed willing to conceal matters. If he pulled someone like Dunn Smith, then the mysterious organization he had just established would instantly come under the watch of the Church. As an evil organization's boss, his future would be worrying. Klein knew that the grey fog was special. He knew it was not something a Beyander at Dunn Smith's sequence could see through. But the problem was that since he had the powers of a Beyander, he had to consider the existence of the gods. Klein had chosen to carefully believe that the 7 orthodox gods existed in reality. Of course, he was more tenable to the belief that these gods were just more powerful than high-sequence Beyanders. Furthermore, they were under strict limitations. At the very least, ever since the 5th epoch, apart from a few oracles, they have not appeared again. Hey, forcefully pulling people here isn't a good thing. No one would wish to be pulled into mystery for some baffling reason. Let's wait and see how things go in the future. Klein sighed and stood up. He released his spirituality and sensed his body's existence. Then, he began imitating the heavy feeling of rapidly plunging down. The scenes in front of him changed. The grey fog and dark red instantly departed him. Klein felt like he had torn through endless water membranes before ultimately seeing the real world, his room in darkness. This time, he was fully awake and seriously took in the entire experience. Strange. There are some differences between the grey fog and the spirit world. Klein moved his limbs and felt the existence of his body. After he seriously thought through the experience, he shook his head, walked to the desk and pulled open the curtains. Whoosh! The curtains were drawn as sunlight poured in, illuminating the room. As he looked at the street outside the oriel window and the pedestrians going back and forth, Klein took a deep breath and muttered silently, "It's time to go out and work. How should I act as a seer? It cannot be rushed. All I can do is use spirit vision now." Backland, Empress Borough. Audrey Hall looked at herself in the mirror. She saw her cheeks flushed red with excitement and her eyes, so bright that they would have daunted anyone from looking into them. She did not examine any of this as she hurriedly recalled. She picked up the ruby-studded fountain pen and wrote the formula to the spectator potion on the exquisite goatskin parchment. 80 milliliters of pure water. 5 drops of autumn crocus essence, 13 grams of cowteeth pional powder. 7 petals of elf flowers. A matured manhall fish's eyeball. 35 milliliters of goat-horned black fish blood. Phew! Audrey heaved a sigh of relief as she read it a few times to confirm that she had not made any mistakes. She had the urge to dance again, but reminded herself to remain restrained. After some thought, she began writing various chemical names around the potion's formula. She then faked the page into complicated and messy chemistry. Yes, as long as one doesn't read it carefully, a person who flips through this randomly will not discover the details I have hidden in here. Excellent. Audrey praised herself and turned her mind towards the acquirement of the materials. I'll first search the few vaults we have. I'll then attempt to exchange for the missing parts with others. If I still can't gather them all, I can only seek help from the hanged man or the fool. What can I offer as payment? After some thought, Audrey closed the notebook and placed it on a tiny bookshelf. Following that, she briskly walked to the door and pulled it open. A golden retriever was sitting obediently outside. The corners of Audrey's mouth curled as she revealed a radiant smile. Susie, you completed the mission perfectly. In the serialized stories on the newspapers, detectives would often have a capable assistant. I think there should be a huge dog supporting a real spectator. Tilda. In an underground basement lit only by a flickering candle, Alger Wilson raised his palm and looked at it carefully. After a long while, he let out a sigh. It's still that miraculous. I was unable to figure out any specific details at all. Despite having made sufficient preparations, he failed to understand how the fool had completed the summoning. He moved his gaze down and looked at the goatskin parchment on the table in front of him. At the title head of the yellowish-brown parchment, there was a Hermes sentence written in dark blue ink. 7. Seafarer. Under the scorching afternoon sun, Klein left his house. Since he had to walk all the way from Iron Cross Street to Welch's Place, he wore a linen shirt instead of his formal attire of top hat and leather boots. He wore a matching brown coat, a round felt hat and a pair of old leather shoes. That way, he did not need to worry that the stench of his sweat would contaminate the rather expensive suit. As he went down Daffodil Street, he strolled toward Iron Cross Street. When he passed by the square around the corner, he subconsciously took a glance. The tents had already vanished. The circus troupe from before had left after finishing their performance. Klein originally imagined the animal trainer who had helped him tell his fortune to be a hidden expert. He believed she had purposely appeared to guide him after discovering something unique about him and that she would meet him and provide hints for the future. However, none of that happened. She left for the next stop in the tour with the circus troupe. How can there be so many cliched tropes? Klein shook his head while grimacing a smile. He turned toward Iron Cross Street. Iron Cross Street was not characterized by just a single street. Like its name suggested, it was formed by two roads that crossed each other. With the intersection at its core, it was split into Left Street, Right Street, Upper Street, and Lower Street. Klein, Benson, and Melissa previously lived on Lower Street. However, the residents living at his former apartment and the surrounding area did not think of the area as Lower Street. Instead, they created the term Middle Street. By doing so, they made a clear difference between those staying there and the poor who lived 200 meters down the road. There, a bedroom was occupied by 5 or 6 people, and sometimes even up to 10. Klein walked along the periphery of Left Street as he let his mind wander. He recalled the Antigonus family's notebook and how it was missing. He thought of its importance to the Nighthawks and thought of the deaths that resulted from it. His heart slowly turned heavy as his face turned ashen. At that moment, a familiar voice sounded. Lad. Oh. Klein turned his head curiously and found himself by Smurran Bakery's entrance. Mrs. Wendy with a head of gray hair was greeting him with a wave and a warm smile. You don't look very happy? Wendy asked genially. Klein rubbed his face and said, a little. Regardless of your worries, tomorrow will always come, said Mrs. Wendy with a smile. Here, try out my newly created sweet iced tea. I'm not sure if it suits the palate of the locals. Locals? Aren't you one, Mrs. Smurran? Klein shook his head in amusement. Trying out something means it's free, right? Wendy Smurran raised her chin a little and said, you guessed right. I'm actually a Southerner. I came to Tingen with my husband, but that was more than 40 years ago. Heh heh, back then, Benson was not born yet. Even your parents did not know each other. I have always been a little unaccustomed to the dietary preferences of Northerners and I'm always missing my hometown's food. I miss pork sausages, potato bread, roasted pancakes, vegetables fried in lard, and roasted meat with specialty sauces. Oh, and I also miss sweet iced tea. Klein suffused a smile when he heard that. Mrs. Smurran, this sure is a topic that makes me hungry. But I feel a lot better. Thank you very much. Delicacies can always cure sorrow. Wendy handed him a cup of brownish-red liquid. This is sweet iced tea I made according to my memories. Try it and tell me if it's nice. After thanking her, Klein took a sip and found it resembling iced red tea from Earth. However, it was not as stimulating. The taste of tea was stronger and felt more refreshing. It instantly expelled the heat brought by the burning sun. It's excellent, he marveled. That puts me at ease. Wendy smiled with squinted eyes as she watched him finish the cup of tea in a genial manner. After chatting with Mrs. Smurran about his moving, Klein returned to the street he was most familiar with. There were far fewer street-side hawkers in the afternoon. They gathered again after 5:30. The ones that stayed behind looked drowsy and listless. The moment he entered the area, Klein's heart suddenly felt overwhelmed by darkness. His heart felt heavy, down, and gloomy for an inexplicable reason. What's happening? He sharply sensed something wrong about himself. He immediately stopped and observed his surroundings, but did not see anything strange. After some thought, Klein raised his hand and tapped his glabella like he was thinking. The extent of his vision immediately transformed. The auras of the hawkers and pedestrians all appeared. Before Klein could observe the colors of their health, his attention was pulled away by the colors that represented gloominess. He was unable to determine the exact thoughts of the observed, but the despondent, apathetic, and gloomy impression was deeply carved into his heart. As he surveyed the area, he realized that even the sun could not disperse those dark colors. It was a sense of gloom that tainted them from years of repression. Upon seeing this, Klein instantly understood the reason. Just as old Neil said, activating his spirit vision easily pulled him into unfamiliar environments and made him feel discomfort. It was also easy for himself to be affected by the emotions of others. A similar principle could be used on an ability like perception. This was an ability he obtained without additional practice after becoming a seer. It was a passive sense that could not be declined. It allowed him to directly sense the existence of anything abnormal. There was bound to be a level of interaction when perceiving things. Therefore, in the Beyonder eyes of someone like a spirit medium, the intensity of everyone's perception is clear. It is like a fire in the night. Therefore, people with high perceptivity were naturally affected by the intense atmosphere of anything abnormal. It could only be repeatedly practiced to grasp, control, and adapt to such outcomes. Such a repressed color is probably formed over extended periods of time, right? Klein sighed as he shook his head, feeling somewhat affected. He tapped his glabella twice again and tried hard to converge his spirituality. Tap. 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 Klein walked toward the apartment and sensed for any abnormal existences or tiny connections while also searching for the Antigonus family's notebook which he had hidden. The streets were the same as usual. There was filthy water and trash on the streets. It only cleared up when he reached the apartment's entrance. Klein pushed open the half-closed door and circled the first floor in the darkness that the sunlight could not reach. The wooden stairs creaked constantly as he went up them. The second floor was as dim as always. Klein released his perception and looked into the darkness. However, not only did he fail to discover any clues regarding his notebook, he even failed to see any invisible spiritual bodies. If it's so easy to encounter them, most ordinary people would not have already sensed the existence of extraordinary matters. Klein sighed in reflection. He had already understood that most spirits did not exist in the form of spiritual bodies, but in the form of spirituality. Only a spirit medium could effectively communicate with them. After circling the third floor once, Klein left the apartment and retraced his memory's footsteps towards Welch's place. He walked for a full hour but did not discover anything along the way. Standing outside the garden bungalow, Klein looked at the building through the locked iron gates and mumbled to himself, "There's no need for me to search Welch's place, right? Captain and Madame Daly must have done a carpet search of the place. Besides, I don't have the key. They can't expect me to climb the walls, right? I'll try another path tomorrow. I've walked so much today, but there are no step counter rankings." While lampooning, Klein returned to the nearby district. He planned on taking a public carriage to Blackthorn Security Company to retrieve his daily allocation of 30 bullets. He needed to make use of his time and practice. A seer's lack of quick and effective offensive means could only be made up with his revolver and cane. The district around Welch's place was relatively clean. Shops with clean and bright windows lined the two sides of the street. At the turn of the street, Klein was just about to seek out the carriage stop when his gaze swept past a few signboards on the second floor. Harrods Department Store, Military Veterans Mess, Divination Club, Ellipsis, Divination Club. Klein silently repeated the name and recalled that he had to act as a seer. Yes, I should take a look, and seek out new ideas. Amid his mixed thoughts, Klein went across the street and went to the second floor. He entered the main foyer to see a beautiful female attendant. The woman with coiled brownish-yellow hair sized up Klein before saying with a smile, "Sir, do you wish to have your fortune told, or do you wish to join our club? What are the conditions for entry?" asked Klein casually. The woman explained with great familiarity, "Fill in your particulars and pay an annual membership fee. The first year is £5 and subsequent years will be £1 a year. Don't worry, we are not like political or business clubs which allow entry through recommendations from formal members. Members can freely use the club's meeting room and various divination rooms and tools. They can enjoy the coffee and tea we provide and read the newspapers and magazines we subscribe for free. They can buy lunch, dinner, and alcoholic beverages at cost price, as well as education materials and materials needed for divination. In addition, we invite at least one famous fortune teller to lecture every month to answer any questions. Most importantly, you can find a bunch of friends with the same hobbies and have an exchange with them. It sounds pretty good, but I do not have the money." Klein gave a self-deprecating smile before asking, "Then what if I want my fortune told? In fact, I do not know if the notebook is destroyed or hidden, but by using backward reasoning, if it is to be destroyed, it could have been done on the spot. There was no need for me to take it away to carry out the destruction." Upon hearing Leonard's question, Klein instantly went into keyboard detective mode and said with a sigh, "Perhaps when Welch, Naya, and I made contact with the unknown existence, it enjoyed the sacrifice of life or wished for similar situations to continue. With the suicide definitely easily discoverable, I was made to take away the notebook to hide it so as to prepare for the existence's second round of entertainment. However, some mishap happened during the process and I failed to succeed in my suicide. This was a reasoned guess Klein made from his consumption of novels, movies, and TV dramas which involved cult sacrifices. As for the mishap that happened midway, he knew very well that it was due to the unexpected variable of him being a transmigrator. Quite a good explanation, but I believe there might be other possibilities. Welch's and Naya's suicide sacrifice might have made it possible for the unknown existence to descend on this world. Then, that notebook is a vessel or a breeding ground for evil. It made you take it away to hide it, worried that we would destroy it if we discovered its birth, before it became strong." Leonard Mitchell suggested another possibility. Having said that, he stared into Klein's eyes and smiled slightly. "Of course, perhaps the notebook has been destroyed. The goal is to hide its content, to conceal the vessel or the brooding of evil. That way, there is a sufficient reason for your failed suicide." What does he mean? Is he suspecting me? Is he suspecting that the original Klein's body is a vessel or used for the brooding of evil? No, what he's being a vessel for is a transmigrator. Actually, brooding isn't a correct term. Klein was taken aback. While he secretly criticized the idea, he weighed his words. "I will not try to defend myself since I've lost memories from that period. Be it Captain or Madame Daly, they have already confirmed that I'm fine." "Your joke isn't funny. I'm only considering a possibility. It does not eliminate the blow the unknown existence encountered when it descended which caused your suicide to fail. We believe that the goddess will ultimately bless us." Leonard laughed as he changed the subject. "Did you discover anything in the afternoon?" After the conversation and the previous encounters, Klein was very wary of Leonard. He answered in a composed manner, "No. I plan on trying a different route tomorrow afternoon." He pointed to the partition and said, "I'll need to head to the armory to draw the bullets. The shooting club opened to 9 at night. After all, its availability increased only after many of its members got off work." "May Goddess bless you." Leonard smiled as he gestured the sign of the crimson moon on his chest. He watched Klein pass through the partition and listened to his footsteps down the stairs. Leonard's smile gradually vanished as a look of doubt appeared in his green eyes. He whispered something with a displeased tone. Down the stairs, Klein followed the gas lamp illuminated corridor to the armory and archives. The iron door was open and the brown-haired Roseanne was standing in front of the table. She was chatting with a top hat-wearing middle-aged man with a thick black beard. Good afternoon, no, good evening. It's always night here. Klein, I heard from old Neil that you have become a Beyander? It's called seer? Roseanne turned her head and deluged him with her questions. She did not hide her curiosity and concern. Klein nodded with a smile. Good afternoon, Miss Roseanne. It's indeed always night here, but it makes one feel a sense of serenity. The description you gave wasn't accurate enough. It should be said that the sequence potion I consumed has the name seer. You still chose to become a Beyander after all, Roseanne said with a sigh as she fell into a deep thought. Klein looked at the middle-aged man beside her and asked politely, You are? Another Nighthawk member or one of the other 2 civilian staff I have not met? Roseanne puckered her lips and said, Brett. Our colleague. He wishes to change slots with me to free up the night after tomorrow. He plans on going to the theater in the North District with his wife to watch The Prideful One. It's to celebrate their 15th-year wedding anniversary. He's truly a romantic gentleman. Brett smiled as he extended his hand and said, With Miss Roseanne around, there's nothing that requires repeating. Hello, Klein. I never expected you to become a Beyander so quickly. As for me, hey, I might never have the courage. Perhaps it's as the saying goes, the ignorant knows no fear, Klein said in a self-deprecating manner as he extended his hand to shake Brett's. Me not having courage is not something bad, said Brett with a shake of his head. A Beyander once told me before his death to never probe the strange and dangerous matters. The less you know, the longer you live. At that moment, Roseanne interjected, Klein, there's no need to mind it. I heard from old Neil that as a seer, you are used as support. It's relatively safe as long as you do not attempt to communicate with unknown existences. Why are you dressed in such clothes? It's so unbecoming of a gentleman. What are you here for? I'm here to draw my 30 bullets. Klein did not reply to Roseanne's first question. He believed that the lady would quickly forget the matter. All right, Roseanne pointed at the table and said, Brett, it's all yours. You should know where the keys and bullets are. Oh, old Neil really is petty. He did not even leave his hand-ground coffee behind. He promised me that I could drink my fill today. She prattled on as Klein received the bullets. The duo left together and went their separate ways at Zoutland Street. One took a public carriage home while the other walked into the shooting club. Bang, bang, bang. Klein repeated the process, gripping the gun, raising his arms, shooting, releasing the cylinder, ejecting the empty shells, and stuffing in rounds, again and again. He became familiar with the process and built it into his muscle memory. Of course, he had a few breaks in between to review and correct the process. After finishing his practice, Klein used the grounds to do various exercises like push-ups. He worked hard to train his body to improve his physique. Once everything was over, he sat in an untracked carriage home. Only then he realized it was nearing 7 and the sky was already dark. Just as Klein was planning to head to the market or streets to buy the ingredients for dinner, the door opened. Melissa had returned with her stationery-filled bag. Apart from that, she carried quite a lot of groceries. I thought you and Benson would be home rather late. This morning, I took out one solely from the place you hide the money. Upon seeing her brother's questioning look, Melissa explained in her usual serious manner. Since you took the money, why didn't you take the public carriage to school? Klein had been reminded of the matter from the morning. Melissa said with a frown, Why should I take a public carriage? It costs 4 pence to get to school. A return trip means 8 pence. Counting Benson and you, we will be spending 24 pence on transportation daily. That's a whole solely. In a week, yes, without counting Sunday, that's still 12 pence. It's almost equal to our rent. Stop, stop, stop. Don't flaunt your mathematical prowess. Klein lowered his palm in an amused manner. Melissa first stopped before adding, It's pretty good walking to school. Our teacher said that everyone should exercise frequently. Besides, I can pick some damaged components on the way. Klein chuckled and said, Then let's do the math again. The public carriage costs 12 solely. The rent is 12 solely and 3 pence. It's a total of £1, 4 solely and 3 pence. Using Benson's salary is enough to pay for it and there will be quite a bit of change left. Yes, he has received last week's salary. As for me, I can still earn £1 10 solely every week. Even if we eat meat every day while counting expenses like gas, charcoal, wood, and condiments, we would still have some left if we are frugal with lunch. We can even subscribe to the morning papers for just 1 penny. In 2 months, when I make up for the advanced payment, I can save money for both you and Benson. We can have new clothes. But we have to think of the possible accidents. Melissa stayed firm on her point. Klein smiled at her and said, then, we can eat less meat. Don't you find spending 50, no, 100 minutes on the road a waste of time? You could use that time to read more and think over problems and improve your results. That way, Melissa, you will be graduate with excellent grades. You will be able to find a job with a pretty good salary. When that happens, what is there to worry about? He fully displayed his experience gained from debating with people on message boards and finally convinced Melissa. She agreed to take the public carriage to school. Phew, I've finally suckered her into doing it. No, how can I call it suckering? This is called convincing. Klein lampooned before taking over the groceries that Melissa had bought. He said with a sigh, remember to buy beef or meat like mutton and chicken. Eat until you're full and enjoy yourself. Only then will you be equipped with a healthy body and a clever brain to match the demanding requirements needed for your studies. Just mentioning it makes me salivate. Melissa puckered her lips and after a few seconds of silence, said, all right. Ellipsis. The next morning, after ensuring that Melissa took a public carriage, Klein and Benson separated and went to their respective companies. The moment Klein stepped into the door, he saw old Neil and Roseanne chatting by the reception desk. The former was still in his classic black robe, without any concern for the gazes of others. The latter had changed into a casual cream-colored dress. Good morning, Mr. Neil, Miss Roseanne, greeted Klein as he took off his hat. Old Neil gave him a mischievous look. Good morning, you did not hear anything you shouldn't have heard last night, right? No, I slept very well. Klein was also quite puzzled over that. He could only put it down to his inadequate perception. Ha, don't mind that. Actually, it's not that easily heard. Old Neil pointed to the partition and said, go to the armory. We will continue out mysticism lessons this morning. Klein nodded and followed old Neil down the stairs and arrived at the armory to replace Brett who had been on duty the entire night. What will we be learning today? Asked Klein curiously. Old Neil dragged out his response and said, the complicated and basic knowledge. But before that, let me teach you an interesting trick. He pointed at the silver chain on his wrist. There was a pure moonstone hanging from the chain. Upon hearing Klein's question, the beautiful lady with elegantly tied-up brownish-yellow hair appeared to lose her patience. However, she maintained her smile and said, our members are free to do divination for others in the club. They also have their prices and we take a very tiny cut as a fee. If you wish to have your fortune told, you can take a look at this album. It has introductions and rates of the members who are willing to do divination for others. However, it's Monday afternoon, so most of our members are busy at work. We only have 5 here today. As she introduced the club, she invited Klein to have a seat on the sofa beside a window in the reception hall. Then, she flipped through the album and pointed out the present club members. Hannes Vincent. Famous Tingen fortune teller. The club's resident mentor. Good at various forms of divination. He charges 4 soldi each time. It's really expensive. That's enough to feed Benson, Melissa, and me to 2 sumptuous dinners. Klein clicked his tongue silently and did not reply. When the woman saw this, she continued flipping the page and introducing one member after another. And the final one, Glasses. A member who joined the club this year. He is skilled in tarot divination. He charges 2 pence each time. Sir, who do you plan on choosing? Klein did not stand on ceremony and answered, Mr. Glasses. Quote ellipsis quote. The female attendant fell silent for 2 seconds before saying, Sir, I have to remind you that Mr. Glasses is only considered a novice. I understand. I will be responsible for my own decision. Klein nodded with a smile. Then please follow me. The woman stood up and led Klein through a door beside the reception hall. It was not a very long corridor and an open meeting room was situated at its end. There was enough sunlight and it was equipped with tables and chairs. There were newspapers, magazines, and paper cards. A faint coffee aroma drifted out. About 2 rooms from the meeting room, the attendant gestured for Klein to stop. She sped up her pace and entered the room. She shouted gently, Mr. Glasses, someone wishes for your divination. Me? A voice filled with surprise and doubt immediately sounded. Following that, there was the sound of a chair moving. Yes, which divination room would you like to use? Replied the lady without any emotion. Topaz room. I like Topaz. Glasses appeared by the meeting room's door and looked curiously at Klein who was waiting not far away. He was a man in his 30s. His skin was slightly dark and his pupils were a dark green shade. Under his light, yellow and soft hair, he was dressed in a white shirt and black vest. A monocle hung from his chest and he seemed to have a good disposition. The attendant did not say anything further as she opened the door to the topaz room which was next to the meeting room. The curtains inside were tightly shut, making it dim. It appeared that only by doing so would one gain revelations from the gods and spirits to obtain an accurate divination outcome. Hello there. I'm Glasses. I never expected you to choose me for your divination. Glasses gave a gentleman's bow, briskly stepped into the room, and sat behind a long table. Frankly, I'm only attempting divination for others. I do not have much experience. For now, I'm not a good fortune teller. You still have a chance for regret. After Klein returned the bow, he entered and closed the door behind him. By the light seeping through the curtains, he said with a smile, "You are a really honest man, but I'm someone who is very firm on his choices. Please have a seat." Glasses pointed at the seat in front of him and thought for a few seconds. Divination is my hobby. Heh heh. In life, one often receives guidance from the divine, but the ordinary person is unable to accurately understand the meaning. This is the reason why divination exists and also why I joined this club. In this aspect, I still lack confidence. Let's make the divination that follows an exchange, a free exchange. How do you like my suggestion? I'll cover the fees the club requires. It's just a quarterpence. Klein did not agree or shake his head. Instead, he smiled. From the looks of it, you have a pretty well-paying and decent job. While he said so, he leaned his body forward slightly. He held his forehead with his right fist and tapped at it twice. But that does not enhance the accuracy of my divination, answered Glasses humorously. Does your head hurt? Do you want to divine problems regarding health? A little. I wish to divine where an item is. Klein had already thought of an excuse as he slowly leaned back. In his eyes, Glasses's aura clearly presented itself. The orange colors by his lungs were dark and sparse. They even influenced the brightness in other areas. This is not a symptom of exhaustion. Klein nodded in an indiscernible manner. Are you searching for a lost item? Glasses thought for a few seconds before saying, then let's do a simple determination. He pushed the neatly stacked tarot cards on the black table toward Klein. Calm down. Think of that item and ask yourself, can it still be found? While doing so, shuffle and cut the deck. All right. Klein actually did not remember what the ancient notebook looked like. All he could do was repeat the question to himself. Can the Antigonus family's notebook still be found? While he repeated the thought, he skillfully shuffled and cut the deck. Glasses picked the topmost card and pushed it in front of Klein. The card was facing down horizontally. Turn it clockwise until it sits vertical. Then flip it open. If the card is inverted, which means the picture on the card is facing away from you, it indicates that the item cannot be found. If the card is upright, then we can continue the divination and seek its actual location. Klein followed his instructions and turned the horizontal card vertical. He clasped the end of the tarot card and flipped it over. It was an inverted card. What a pity. Glasses sighed. Klein did not respond because his attention was focused on the tarot card in front of him. The inverted card's picture was dressed in gorgeous clothes and splendid headdress, the Fool. It's the Fool again? It can't be so coincidental, right? According to the Hanged Man and Old Neil, divination is the outcome of the communication of spirituality and the spirit world with a higher dimensional, me. Tarot cards are only a convenient tool to read what the truth symbolizes. In theory, using any divination item doesn't matter as it doesn't affect the outcome. Klein frowned as he thought for a moment. Can it be divined whether the item is already in the hands of others? Of course. Follow the same procedure and do it again. Glasses nodded with rich interest. Klein shuffled and cut the deck while thinking of his question. He drew a card and placed it horizontally before turning it vertical clockwise. He finished all the preparations with a serious expression. Taking a deep breath, Klein reached out his hand and flipped over the tarot card. Please do not be the Fool again. While praying, he suddenly relaxed because the card was that of the star and it was inverted. From the looks of it, the item has not been taken by others yet, interpreted Glasses with a smile. Klein nodded and raised his right hand. He tapped his glabella, looking as though he was deep in thought. Then, he took out 2 pennies with a dark copper luster from his pocket and pushed it towards Glasses. Didn't I say it was free? Glasses said with a frown. Klein laughed as he got up. This is the respect divination deserves. All right, thank you for your generosity. Glasses stood up and reached out his hand. After shaking his hand, Klein took 2 steps back and turned around. He walked to the door and twisted the doorknob. Just as he was about to leave, he suddenly turned his head and made a terse sound. Mr. Glasses, I suggest that you see a doctor as soon as possible. Focus on your lungs. Why? Asked Glasses in surprise. Are you cursing me because you aren't pleased with the divination results? Klein thought for a moment before saying, it's a symptom based on the color of your face. Well, your glabella seems dark less than sup greater than 1 less than, sup greater than. Glabella seems dark. It was the first time Glasses was hearing such a description. Klein did not explain further as he walked out the room with a smile. He closed the wooden door behind him. Is he an unlicensed doctor or a herbalist? Glasses shook his head, amused. He then picked up his monocle for divination. On careful look, he realized his glabella was indeed dark. But this was a problem of the environment. In the darkness due to the closed curtains, not only was his glabella dark, his entire face was shrouded in darkness. It's not a very likable joke. Glasses muttered. He worriedly divined his own health to make sure that everything was all right. After leaving the divination club, Klein had an additional plan for the future. It was to save as much money as possible to pay the annual fee to become a member of the club. After which, he could begin acting as a seer. As for why he did not choose to do it independently, it was because he temporarily lacked the resources and channels. He could not bring himself to stand on the streets as a hawker since he cared for his reputation. A few minutes later, the public carriage arrived. He spent 2 pence and reached Zoutland Street, which was not very far off. He pushed open the door to Blackthorn Security Company but did not see the familiar brown-haired girl. He only saw the black-haired, green-eyed Leonard Mitchell with his poetic bearing behind the reception counter. Good afternoon. Where's Roseanne? Klein asked after taking off his hat and bowing. Leonard smiled and pointed at the partition. It's her shift tonight at the armory. Without waiting for Klein to ask another question, Leonard said as though he was pondering over a matter, Klein, I have a question that has always puzzled me. What is it? Klein was puzzled. Leonard stood up and smilingly said with a relaxed tone, why did Welch and Naya commit suicide on the spot while you returned home? It likely has to do with how the unknown existence made me take the Antigonus family's notebook away to hide it, answered Klein with the official surmise. Leonard paced around before turning to look straight into Klein's eyes. If your suicide was meant to silence you and wipe out any clues, why weren't you made to destroy the notebook there and then? Report chapter. An interesting trick? Klein asked out of extreme curiosity. Old Neil chuckled and said, I'll complete my patrol of the armory, storeroom, and archives. Use the 2 cups on the table to make 2 cups of coffee. In one of the cups, put something unpleasant. As for what it is, you can decide for yourself. Use your imagination. The only request from me is to not waste too much coffee powder. Those are coffee beans grown on the Fanapotter Plateau and hand-ground by me. All right. Although Klein was unsure what old Neil was up to, he happily agreed to it. He watched him open the iron gates to the armory with a copper key and then heard the echoing footsteps inside. Slowly, he settled the cups down and confirmed that there was still hot water in the kettle. He removed the silver tin can's lid and using a tiny spoon with a metallic sheen, Klein scooped a spoonful of rich aromatic coffee powder into each of the 2 cups. Then, he poured in the hot water and stirred it. As a transmigrator who came from an era abundant in resources, he was no stranger to coffee. However, it was only limited to instant coffee. After finishing the task, Klein pondered for a moment and sat down. He crossed his right leg and took some of the mud which had stained the bottom of his leather boots and placed it in the left cup. Then, he carefully stirred it again until the colors and smells of the 2 cups of coffee were practically indistinguishable. A few minutes later, old Neil walked out the armory while swinging his keys. He then closed the iron gates with a clang. Are you done? His turned his slightly turbid dark red eyes over and looked at Klein across the table. Yes, replied Klein with a nod. Old Neil chuckled and removed the silver chain around his wrist and sat down. His expression quickly turned serene. He held out his chain-holding left hand and allowed it to hang over the coffee cup to his right. The moonstone nearly touched the liquid. Amid the relaxing calmness, the moonstone trembled suddenly. It began spinning the chain in a counterclockwise manner. This cup is the one with the unpleasant thing, said old Neil surely. Without waiting for Klein to confirm, he put away the silver chain and picked up the other cup of coffee and took a sip. Do you like bitter coffee? I'm used to having a tablespoon of sugar and a tablespoon of milk. Klein did not reply but instead asked with his interest piqued, your divination sure is accurate. Was it because of the moonstone? That was moonstone, right? This is known as pendulum dowsing in divination. It's also called spirit dowsing. It relies on your own astral projection's connection with the spirit world and space to communicate with spiritual intelligence through the aid of natural materials such as crystals, gems, or special metals. The good and bad of things can be divined. Let's talk about the 2 cups of coffee. A counterclockwise motion implies bad, while a clockwise motion is good. If it doesn't move, it's neither good or bad. You can write the statement on a piece of paper. Take note, it's a statement and not a question. Old Neil put down the cup of coffee and explained in detail. Klein asked as though he was thinking, does that mean one should use questioning sentences? Yes, you cannot use is so-and-so willing to be my fiancé, but you should instead use, so-and-so is willing to be my fiancé. Write it on a piece of paper and place it on the desk. Then use your dominant hand to hold the pendulum chain. Take note, use your dominant hand, said Old Neil with a chuckle. When doing so, keep your arm straight. Adjust the chain's length and make the moonstone hang just above the piece of paper to the point of almost touching what we wrote. Then, close your eyes and repeat the sentence 7 times in your mind. Open your eyes when you are done and see if the spirit pendulum turns or not. If it doesn't, close your eyes again and repeat the process until it moves. Klein nodded slightly and asked, counterclockwise means, no, and clockwise means, yes? It can also be interpreted as success or failure, corrected Old Neil. He taught Klein the other usages and details of spirit pendulum divination. Klein pondered over the matter and discovered that it was a very useful divination trick. For instance, he could quickly use it in an unfamiliar environment to determine if the food he was offered was poisonous or not. He did not need any additional knowledge of field biology. Of course, such divination methods were overly simple. The answers he could receive were limited to 2 or 3. There was no way for deeper investigation or interpretation. For example, although something could be harmful to the body, it could become very beneficial after some processing. An example was certain foods. They were indeed damaging to the body, but nothing serious. If one was on the brink of starving, eating it would not be a huge problem. These were things that spirit dowsing could not determine. I will have to quickly save money to buy crystals or pure silver to create a spirit pendulum. Klein sighed. Old Neil looked at him in puzzlement. You can apply for one directly. This is standard issue for Beyonders, especially Beyonders like us who take on a support role. There's still a topaz and pure silver spirit pendulum in the armory. But I'm still not a formal member of the team. Klein's heart palpitated in excitement, but he felt a little hesitant. Old Neil chuckled and said, for Beyonders, regardless of whether they are formal members or not, they have to be provided with conveniences in other areas since there's no pay rise. Maybe the word perk is more suitable. I'll apply with Captain later. Klein clenched his fists secretly as he made up his mind. How was he to know if Captain would approve his request without trying? All right, said Old Neil with a smile. We can officially begin our mysticism curriculum. The basics consist of symbolism. Do you know what symbolism means? Klein recalled the bits and pieces he had heard and the things he had seen and heard from his spirit world and the gray fog. He deliberated and said, regardless of the spirit world or the illusory stellar space, as well as the unknown realms, they are beyond our sensory world. It's not something that can be accurately described by the information our ears, nose, and eyes obtain. What we obtain are simply indescribable experiences and direct revelations. They also appear as abstract characters or pictorial symbols. These symbols represent different items and different meanings. Very accurate. As expected of a seer. Old Neil nodded solemnly. Only by grasping the ability to interpret the symbols can you really take the next step into the world of mysticism. Yes, the pictures on tarot cards and each of the elements in the pictures are symbols. They are man-made symbols that help us understand and interpret primordial revelations. He pulled out a piece of paper and picked up a fountain pen beside him. He drew a short curve. Following that, he added a few vertical lines beneath the curve. He looked up at Klein and asked, "Do you know what this symbol represents?" Klein looked at it for quite a while before saying hesitatingly, "Eyelashes?" Old Neil exhaled. "This is the symbol of the Bumper Harvest constellation. This is the Thunderous constellation, and this is the Frost constellation." He casually drew a few more symbols. As Klein memorized them, he could not help but comment, the names of these constellations are really, especially unsophisticated. Yes, unsophisticated. How tacky and primordial. Old Neil revealed a smile. Emperor Russell thought the same back then. He always had the intention of changing the constellation names to things like Virgo, Cancer, and Scorpio. Unfortunately, he did not have the strength to go against tradition. At the very least, these constellations' old names and the corresponding dates they represent guide farming and harvests. I have to say that Emperor Russell sure is a person with ideas. Klein was at a loss for words. Yes, Emperor Russell was likely a decent person when he was alive. Old Neil was unable to understand Klein's humor as he continued explaining the various basic symbols, such as the various constellations, the sun, the crimson moon, the brown star, the red star, and the blue star. While talking about these, he would teach Klein how to draw the divination astrolabe and indicate what things to pay attention to. He also taught the materials and creation of a crystal ball, and the choice of incantations. The teachings overwhelmed Klein. If not for his discovery that the seer potion had improved his memory slightly, he would have long asked old Neil to stop to aid his digesting of the information. That's all for today's mysticism class. Think over it yourself and ask me if you have any questions. Old Neil took out a gold pocket watch and opened it with a snap to check the time. Do not forget to read the historical documents I prepared for you. To be frank, I feel fear seeing them. All right, Klein took the pieces of paper that were sketched with symbols by old Neil. He quickly went through the mysticism knowledge he learned today to prevent himself from forgetting it. Old Neil took a sip of a newly brewed cup of coffee and said, "Memory itself won't do. You have to use if often. That way, you can make the knowledge instinctual. Also, cogitation has to be carried on every day. Only more practice and usage will allow you to grasp the power of the potion, digging into the mysteries it hides away and removing its unpleasant effects." With this raised, Klein recalled acting and the divination club. He probed, "My potion's abilities are related to divination. Practicing by myself will not do. I need to make contact with lots of people and divine for them to quickly grasp it. I plan on joining the divination club after having some spare cash, the one on Howe Street in North Borough, to become a real seer." This was not something he could hide from the Nighthawks in the future. It was better to prepare them. Your idea is very similar to Daly's. She has always clamored to be a real spirit medium. Old Neil shook his head and laughed. But why must you wait till you have spare cash? You can apply to Dunn and get him to approve of the expenses. Organizations like a divination club might also have cultists or members of evil organizations in them. As a civilian staff member of the Nighthawks and a standard Beyander, your membership makes it easy for us to monitor them. It's part of the job. We would regularly monitor these places, but as we lack manpower, we can't keep watch on them for long. Now, it can be handled to you. I can do that? As he looked at old Neil's serious expression, Klein was dumbfounded. This is making an expense claim for private matters. I know nothing about such matters. Indeed, I'm just a keyboard warrior. You wish to use your own money to do this? Old Neil smiled as he added when he saw Klein's face. Klein immediately shook his head as he answered firmly, "I plan on reporting it to Captain." Old Neil nodded in satisfaction and looked at the cup of coffee with the unpleasant thing inside. It had not been poured away. "What did you put in there?" Klein smiled embarrassingly. "It's just some dirt underneath my boots. Its color and your coffee powder looks almost the same." Old Neil was taken aback as he suddenly clasped his mouth and roared, "Why aren't you pouring it away yet?